you. In return, we ask that you look after our team, that you smile and be kind to them because they are the front line of the next few months. And what heroes. Please shop normally. Please don't stockpile. Please don't panic buy. Our doors will be open every day. You can pop in and get what you need. But if we all just shop normally, there'll be food for everybody every day and we'll all feel better about it. Like, this is the way that we can serve New Zealand by alleviating some of the stress, is to make sure that we've got food for you. But we can do it better together. And now's the time to show our beautiful Kiwi spirit.
Can we do some quick fire? Someone wants to know, are you going to let the elderly in an hour before other people?
So we've been thinking about that a lot, and what we now sort of come to the conclusion is probably we don't want them out at all. We want to look after them in their home. So what we're doing is we are diverting our online service to priority customers, and by priority customers I mean the elderly, I mean the immunised, compromised, and those people who otherwise cannot go out. So that our service for them will be, just for those people, and that's how we're going to look after those New Zealanders, and which we're activating it sort of day by day because we've had to build a completely new system to do it. So the elderly will start from today, and the rest of those customers, people that have given cancer treatment, will start in the next few days. But I'll let you know. So that's our way to look after.
Sorry, I missed that, Kerry. You're doing what for those customers?
So you know how we've got a massive online business?
Yeah.
What we're doing now is we're repurposing our online business to just meet the needs of our most vulnerable New Zealanders. So elderly New Zealanders, people who are getting cancer treatment, people who have got issues that affect their immune system, so that we can make sure that they are safe and secure. They do not have to leave their homes. That they can get their groceries delivered to them. That's what we're doing with our online service. We think it's the best way to help vulnerable New Zealanders. It's just taking us a few days to make it because we've got to create this system. We've got to change our whole kind of network to do it. But we're on to it. We're working really quick.
Okay. Someone wanted to know about wiping down screens with self-service. I know it's a small thing, but I just read a letter out from someone, and I wonder if you had anything to say about it. Are you encouraging your staff to wipe down self-service checkout screens?
Oh, we are cleaning up the wazoo. We've been, we've upped our cleaning for the last 10 to 14 days, including having commercial cleaners in all day doing high touch points. So we're already on to that. And our team have been, we're following all Ministry of Health guidelines around extra sanitising our team can do both for themselves and at the checkout. So no, we're on to that. We're all good with that.
That's our headline, by the way, Kerry, cleaning up the wazoo.
Sorry.
No, that's good. That's good. And how about staff? Do you have enough, and are you looking for staff? Difficult, I guess, as we go into lockdown, but for people who are looking for work, is that an option?
We are absolutely looking for team. Our doors are open. We'd like to recruit as many people as we can, not only because of the amazing demand, but to give our team a rest. We need to make sure that everybody still gets some rest and some time with their own families and some time to recover from the very busy last 3 weeks. So we're really looking for team right throughout our business.
Okay.
So
Kerry,
get online.
Kerry Hannafin, thank you very much for your time. Let's talk again sometime. Really appreciate it. RNZ National will stay on air with this rolling coverage. We have a 3-hour checkpoint special next. Thanks so much for listening this afternoon. Stay away from the supermarket and be kind.
Kei te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen and I will be with you for 3 hours until 7 o'clock tonight. The country is headed into lockdown. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern said without upgrading to alert level 4 quickly, tens of thousands of New Zealanders could die. From tomorrow, schools will close, and by midnight Wednesday, all businesses, restaurants, bars and gyms will be forced to close too. Supermarkets, pharmacies, medical services and gas stations are exempt and will remain open. The lockdown will last for at least 4 weeks. We'll speak to the Prime Minister's Chief Science Advisor. We'll also talk to the Education Minister and businesses affected. We'll have experts to answer your questions too. Police Commissioner Mike Bush is about to begin a press conference. We'll take that live too.
RNZ News at 4. Good afternoon. I'm Paul Brennan. The government has lifted the alert level for the coronavirus to level 3 immediately and will move to level 4 within 48 hours. During level 4, everyone is instructed to stay at home and schools, universities and most businesses will be closed. Making the announcement this afternoon at Parliament, the Prime Minister says transmission of the virus within the community is now likely. Jacinda Ardern says there is currently a window of opportunity to stop the virus and stop it multiplying. The Director-General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, today announced 36 new COVID-19 cases, bringing the total to 102. Of the new cases, 2 are being treated as community transmission. Dr Bloomfield says more than 7,000 tests have been processed and testing will continue at capacity to identify more cases. Ministry of Health data shows the youngest person infected with the virus is a child and the oldest is a person in their 70s. The government has announced a freeze on rent increases. The Finance Minister, Grant Robertson, says landlords will not be able to raise rents or terminate tenancies without a reason.
We know that for many New Zealanders, paying the rent is one of the biggest weekly bills they face, and we want to ensure that we ease any pressure on that.
Grant Robertson says an agreement has also been struck with the banks to provide significant relief to people with mortgages, with details to be released in the coming days. The manager of corporate affairs for Woolworths and Countdown supermarkets, Kiri Hannafin, says the panic buying that's going on now is disastrous and she is begging for people to stop. She says their supermarkets have plenty of food. The Business Committee will meet tomorrow via teleconference to work through the implications of moving the alert level 4 on Parliament. Leader of the House, Chris Hipkins, says the Speaker has been asked to recall Parliament, which is in recess this week, on Wednesday. He says a small number of MPs will receive the Prime Minister's epidemic notice and pass legislation to allow government funding to continue to flow. Mr Hipkins says all other parliamentary business will be put on hold.
An accountability mechanism will be established to allow the opposition and backbench MPs as necessary to continue to do their job of questioning the government, of holding the government to account when Parliament is not able to meet. At this point, Parliament will adjourn.
Chris Hipkins says there is no set date for Parliament resuming, but it will be recalled if necessary. National Party leader Simon Bridges says the opposition has offered to help the government as it responds to the Covid-19 crisis. Mr Bridges urged New Zealanders to follow official instructions and says going into lockdown is the right thing to do.
National stands ready and willing to help and to be constructive and to play a role in making sure the decisions are the right ones in the interests of New Zealanders. And I just urge all New Zealanders to follow the rules, to follow what the Prime Minister has instructed, what government officials and emergency services will be saying.
We leave the news right now and we go to the press conference and we're introducing John Omler of the Government Control
Government. It's this leadership team, you see here, that will manage every aspect of the government's plan to keep New Zealanders safe and well and to manage the sustainability of the nation. We know this is a difficult time for New Zealanders and this leadership is a critical part of the government's plan to support us all. As the all-of-government controller of the leadership team, and I should say my name is John Omler, I'm joined by the Director-General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, Police Commissioner Mike Bush, who's responsible for strategic operations oversight, Sarah Stewart-Black, over here, who is the Director, Civil Defence Emergency Management, and Dr Peter Crabtree, who's here, who is responsible for all-of-government strategy and policy. There has been and there is an enormous amount of work underway to ready New Zealand for this management of COVID-19. The Ministry of Health has been shouldering much of this effort to date, but this issue goes way beyond a public health issue. Its impacts are wide-ranging. The COVID-19 National Response Leadership Team is supporting the great work that Health has done and is broadening the effort. Our leadership team is pulling together the many agencies across government that will enable us to slow and stop the spread of this virus. Our team has been running for about 2 weeks and the National Crisis Management Centre has been activated since Thursday the 12th of March. We have multiple streams of work underway in policy, operations, communications and in the regulatory space. We have a very large number of public servants working on our COVID-19 response, often alongside local government and the private sector to develop workable solutions for the challenges ahead. All of this work is urgent and we endeavour to deliver at pace. As the Prime Minister said, we have a window of opportunity to break the chain of community transmission and contain the virus. This will allow us to protect New Zealanders as much as possible. It's clear that there'll be significant disruption to everyone, but we're acutely aware that the alternative is far worse. The Prime Minister said earlier this afternoon that essential services will continue to run. Let me explain which services are considered essential. They include the health sector, any entity involved in the Covid-19 response, planning or logistics, or that has civil defence and emergency management functions. Key public services, transport providers including Kiwi Rail, New Zealand Post and courier drivers and freight providers, teachers to provide essential services, public safety and national security staff, building and construction workers, utilities and communications personnel including news media and supply chains, supermarkets and pharmacies, social services, financial services, food producers, biosecurity and animal health staff. Now this list is not prescriptive and it can and will be reviewed. We have a call centre where people can ring in for clarification and a process to continue to update it as may be needed. I make a point though that if people are looking for a lot of exceptions, that undermines the intent of this, which is to stop people mixing and contacting with other people as far as we possibly can. Just talking about the border for a moment, the influx of people into New Zealand has significantly reduced. There'll be a continuation of processing people on arrival, with health officials continuing to screen. As people enter, they will be required to go into self-isolation. If people live close to where they land, the intent is that they can go directly home. If they live a distance from the point of landing, other self-isolation arrangements will be necessary. With goods at the border, the focus is on keeping imports and exports going to the maximum extent possible. We'll do everything to continue supply chains, and I expect this to occur. There are a number of information sheets already up on the covid19.govt.nz website and more in development. Just as an indication, there's one about staying at home and what it means, another about essential businesses, which contains the list I've just talked about, non-essential businesses and what they should do, mass gatherings and the cancellation of those, education, which includes a hyperlink to the education website, access to healthcare, which will be very important for people, public transport and domestic travel, and the production line is going. So there's more of those as we look at the supply side and delivering them to you, but equally, if there are gaps that we become aware of, we'll continue to fill those with information. I'm confident that this all-of-government leadership is the best way to support New Zealanders during this time of economic and social disruption. Together, us and the community will be able to unite against COVID-19 and put New Zealand in the best position for recovery. Now, I'm very happy to take questions. If I can answer them, I might. I'm more likely to defer to one of the leadership team. Yes, let's take here. Thank you.
Can you just clarify exactly what time the lockdown does start?
The lockdown, the Prime Minister's words, I think, were immediately.
No, level 4 lockdown.
Oh, level 4 lockdown. I think we'll notify that closer to the time. There's work we need to do. The Prime Minister, I think, used the term 48 hours, so it'll be something of that nature, but we'll be absolutely precise about it in due course.
Have you been briefed on a current run on supermarkets, and
Yes.
at what point are you going to step in and regulate entry to them?
The Prime Minister made clear that people did not need to do that. I think we can reiterate that. There's plenty of food to go around. People will be able to visit supermarkets. It's unfortunate that people are not heeding the messages that they've been given. I know that the police are aware of the issue of the run on supermarkets, and supermarket people are talking to them. I hope we don't need to get to the point of calling for assistance. Let's hope that New Zealanders do the right thing.
At what point do you call them in, mate?
I can't give you an answer to that now. We'll see.
What is the role of the Defence Force from now?
The role of the Defence Force, I'll defer to Mike Bush to answer that question, because he's been working with the Chief of Defence Force about the ways in which they may be able to be used in the next stages. Mike.
Thanks very much. The Defence Force have already been working with us in terms of this command. They provide great knowledge, expertise around logistics, around intelligence and around operations. So they are already part of our Operations Command Centre. I have been talking to the Chief of Defence to understand exactly, get a stocktake of what resources they have immediately available. Hopefully we'll never need the Defence Force, but you always want to be prepared. So they're quite willing at our direction to work alongside us while we're out in the communities. Some of the points you've raised are about ensuring that when we start being out there in the communities, it's about education and encouragement. We don't want to get to a place where we have to enforce these restrictions, but we will if required. And if we require extra people to work alongside us, the Chief of Defence is very happy to stand up his people.
When you say we out there in the communities, do you mean police and the Defence Force?
I mean the police initially, yes.
Will you do rolling patrols through the streets to make sure there aren't gatherings?
You will see more police officers out there almost immediately in terms of what's been decreed to ensure that, and I'll say this again, our first role is to encourage and educate. But if people don't comply, we will be looking to enforce those things.
Is that a fine? Is that potential imprisonment? What can happen?
There's a range of options. So there's legislation under the Health Act where we have a medical officer of health who will authorise us to do things. Sarah Stewart-Black may need to invoke some Civil Defence Emergency Act legislation which will enable us. There's also powers under the Summary Offences Act if people are doing things they shouldn't do. Your question around supermarkets, if people are being disrespectful, if it goes to another level, we will intervene to keep those places safe and to maintain order.
Ms. Bromley, can you set out for us the structure of the government response here? Where does your body sit? Where does Mr Bush sit? Where does the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet sit? Where does Civil Defence sit?
What has happened is that there's been a National Crisis Management Centre set up effectively under the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet. That's a coordinating body. It's not a structure in its own self. Each Department of State continues to do its job as part of this recovery. Our role as a group of people who have been pulled together from various places is to lead and coordinate that, not to set up a whole new organisation.
What behaviour will police be on the lookout for?
Any unlawful type of behaviour, anything that brings anyone else's safety into question. The way we police in New Zealand is that we have very much a prevention first philosophy, intervene, especially with low level things. So even if someone does need to be arrested for any breach of the peace or any disorder, we're quite happy to take them to our place for a calling off period. We don't necessarily need to prosecute those people. I think that's really important these days. But our prime objective here is to deter people from doing anything that will cause harm to others. We will be reminding people that if they don't comply, they will endanger other people's lives. Other people will die. So I think that's pretty good motivation for people to listen to the direction and adhere to the prescription inside those levels.
I think the point Mike makes is really important. This isn't a set of restrictions for their own sake. This is restrictions to save lives. I would have the expectation that New Zealanders across the board would want to comply with this because they know it's the right thing to do.
What will this mean for families who've got domestic violence in them? Because obviously sort of being trapped within a home for a month is a very scary concept for a lot of people. What support are you giving them will this change?
That's something that we've been considering very seriously because you're correct in that assertion. So we've been watching overseas trends and yes, that kind of thing does increase inside homes. That will be one of our top priorities. So if we look at our policing model right now, we will be adapting and changing how we police, obviously, over this period, setting new priorities. Our response to Covid-19 is absolutely one of those, but so is serious harm inside families.
Would you encourage, in that instance, neighbours then to be sort of extrally sort of on edge for any signs that something might be happening next door and getting in touch?
I would encourage neighbours to be looking out for each other absolutely regardless of the circumstance. But if you're hearing something that really concerns you, please make sure you call us. We are there to respond to prevent people being harmed. And again, this is one of our top priorities.
I think there's 2 points I'd add to that. One is that what we're talking about is physical distancing to protect people, but not social isolation. There's no problem with calling out to your neighbours over the fence and having a chat. There's just keep the 2 metre distance. So physical separation, physical distancing, but social connection, keep it maintained. I think the other thing is that you're not absolutely locked inside your house. You can go outside, you can get some fresh air, you can go for a walk, but please stay more than 2 metres away from other people. And if you're coughing and spluttering, for goodness sake, don't go out at all.
Could the NZDF have a role to play in airlifting, moving people around the country before the lockdown comes into effect? Air New Zealand have talked about boosting their services, but if they can't fill the demand, could the Air Force have a role?
The Defence Force are standing by for whatever need is required, but so are Air New Zealand, very receptive to any requests. The private sector, the commercial sector are very keen to do what they can to be part of this and to help New Zealanders.
We're getting more questions now about self-isolation, particularly from people, because it seems to be very geared around households, protecting individual households. What about people that have a partner that lives in another household, or somebody whose kids might live in another household? Are they allowed to travel? Are they allowed to just mingle together, all the rest of it?
But we'll get Ashley to address that one.
Thank you, John.
That's all right.
I'm not sure I've thought about that, but remembering what we're trying to do is prevent people gathering and ensure that we're breaking those opportunities for transmission. Yes, not every household is a single family unit, and I mean I think families will work out what is the best way to make arrangements that achieve what we're trying to achieve, which is that opportunity to break the chain of transmission. And we will make sure that our that Healthline and our other helplines are able to give good advice if people do want advice. And we'll put some options and some advice up on the website as well about, again, what are the specific things that you might be able to do to help keep people safe, both inside your household and in the wider community.
So the risks there of people missing their partners or missing their children are very real in terms of the mental health risks as well, right?
Yes, and I think this is an issue for not just that sort of situation. This is going somewhat into the unknown for many of us, if not all of us. So we need to make sure we remain well connected within our families, within our friendship and neighbourhood groups and within our communities. It's a real opportunity to think about what other people need and help other people. You can still do the shopping for your friends. You can do shopping for elderly neighbours. This is a great opportunity actually for communities to support each other.
So for couples with shared custody, for example, it might be okay for the kids to sort of move between two households over the month.
If they're in the same community and if they are indeed making sure that they are achieving the intent of this, which is to not spread or risk spreading the virus.
Okay, I'm sure there'll be lots of questions like the one you've just asked, which I know I hadn't even thought about, but I'm sure that some of the team might have. As we work through some of that and come up with sensible guidance, we'll make sure it is on the website. But we've got to remember the end game here. The end game is we do not want this virus passed from person to person, and so everything we do is geared around that.
Can you tell us which area of Auckland the community transmission might be in so that Aucklanders can take extra precautions from that area?
I don't know the exact area in Auckland, but what I would say is that from now, people should be taking every precaution wherever they live in Auckland or indeed in the wider country.
What is it like for the essential workforce in New Zealand, do you think? How many people will still be going to work?
I do not have that figure here, but can provide it some other time.
Another logistical question. Are people going to be able to online shop and get couriers delivered to them, so in that instance?
Yes, that's absolutely part of the plan.
So even private couriers will still be operating as they're an essential service?
That's my understanding.
Food supply.
Yeah, food supply is essential.
Yes.
That doesn't answer that.
But like, so, you know, for example, if someone, you know, wants to buy something, some board games or something like that, and they buy it on an online site, and it's a private courier driver, is that still going to be available over the next month?
Well, let's have a think about that. I doubt that the staff will be in at the mail order place because they won't be an essential service.
Will dairies and superettes be part of the sort of supermarket group?
Peter? Sorry, I didn't hear the last question, but in terms of freight and logistics, yeah.
You'll go to that first.
I was just going to the prior question. In terms of freight and logistics, that is an essential service. So I think it's just a matter of how much of that system is considered essential. And so there is definitely, we want to keep things moving in terms of goods and services to people.
Yep. And a specific question about dairies and superettes. Look, details still to be worked out. There is a 48-hour window.
Yeah. Commissioner, you said that you may need to invoke some civil defence measures. Can you be more specific? Which? I mean, there's apparently going to be a debate about a state of emergency. What emergency powers do you want?
I think the best person to answer that question is right beside me.
Thank you very much. So what we're looking at is if we move to stage 4 as anticipated with what the Prime Minister has said today, that we are likely to utilise the powers under the Civil Defence Emergency Management Act, which is a state of national emergency.
What are those powers?
So those enable us to be able to close or restrict access to roads or public places, remove or secure dangerous structures or materials, provide rescue, first aid, food, shelter, conserve essential supplies, regulate traffic, dispose of fatalities in terms of people that have passed away or animals, enter into premises to rescue people or save lives, evacuate premises or places, remove vehicles and vessels, requisition equipment and materials and assistance. So in terms of powers under the CDM Act that may be necessary for COVID-19, what I'd like to note is the fact that there are multiple pieces of legislation that are being utilised and will continue to be utilised. The national state of emergency would not trump any of those pieces of legislation. They would continue to be utilised. At this stage, we would anticipate some of the likely powers that would be needed for this situation are powers of requisition to manage wider consequences. So, for example, providing for the conservation and supply of fuel and other essential supplies, closing roads, stopping people doing activities that may contribute to the emergency, excluding people from places, and prohibiting or regulating traffic.
Which authorities would carry out those?
So that's under the Director, Civil Defence Emergency Management. My role is a statutory role.
I mean, which, the personnel from which departments?
Right. So it would be a range of agencies. This is taking an across government, and when I say that I mean across central government and local government response effort, but also including the emergency services, Defence Forces you've already heard, but a range of other agencies as well. I would like to particularly acknowledge the leadership of mayors and other community leaders and working alongside the National Emergency Management Agency and Health to date, and recognise the critical role that those civil defence emergency management groups across the country will have alongside district health boards and public health units to work together with a range of other agencies to support communities at that local level.
We could see Defence Force and police basically enforcing road closures.
We can see a whole range of agencies that might need to be involved in that, and I think that's something that will be worked through at a practical level. We'll come back to you on that.
I'd come back to what I was saying before, though. I can't imagine that New Zealanders won't see that this is the right thing to do. There's been considerable clamour for taking this next step. I think people will respond. That's my hope. If we have to use those powers, I'll be disappointed.
You hope we don't see Defence Force basically out and about having to enforce this?
For a level of comfort, I'd be happy to see them there. If it got to the enforcement side, I'd be disappointed, but I wouldn't rule it out.
The restrictions on public transport to those undertaking essential services, just to clarify, does that cover any member of the public who needs to access essential services, such as a supermarket or a pharmacy? Will it be open in that case? For whoever can answer.
So in terms of supply chain management, I think we're looking at an end-to-end solution. So that's about making sure that the flows of goods that might be needed by supermarkets are enabled all the way along that chain so that people can access those products from their supermarket or via online services.
Talking more about consumers, sorry. So if someone needs to get to the supermarket and relies on public transport, will they still be able to use that? Does that qualify as?
Yes. Ashley, do you want to?
No, you've answered the question.
Yes.
This group will work. So how often do you meet and how will you dovetail with the subcommittee of cabinet?
Sorry, I missed the question.
Just a couple of questions about how this group or state is going to work. How often will you meet and will you dovetail with the committee of cabinet that's been set up by Prime Minister Ardern?
At the moment, we're meeting probably several times every day, starting at 7:30 in the morning. And after that, as needed, overseeing the entire work program, which of course is developing day by day, as you can imagine. Yes, we are effectively the committee of officials that supports the Cabinet Committee on COVID.
Briefing the Leader of the Opposition, given the kind of wide state powers being taken?
I haven't, but I think, Ashley, can you talk about the health? You've been briefing others.
Yes, so I've previously briefed, or at least held a briefing for all MPs in here around this issue a couple of weeks ago. I've also briefed the opposition spokesperson on health previously, and I imagine we would be offering ourselves to brief key politicians. Of course, I think many of them will be relocating themselves in their electorates over the next day or two in preparation for the next few weeks.
Another question just about in terms of the communications, because until now we've had the Prime Minister largely and Ashley speaking from those different perspectives. Are there now going to be more talking heads, and who will New Zealanders know to go to or understand or for the rest of it?
I imagine there will be more talking heads. For example, if there's issues in the transport sector, we might well have Peter Mersey, the Secretary for Transport, come along to one of these sessions. It may well be if the issues are in the primary sector that Ray Smith, the Chief Executive of Ministry of Primary Industries, would be here. So I think it's as the right person is needed to be able to give information and answer questions, because, as I said when I started out, it started off as a health issue and it's actually a whole of New Zealand issue writ large. So there will be different people for different elements of the response. Yes.
People are clamouring to get home over the next few days if they're in a different city for whatever reason and they're unable to get on a flight or another form of transport. Is there sort of going to be a sort of compassionate consideration given to those people who are just trying to get home, if people who are worried that there is going to be a firm lock-off?
I'm not sure that I can absolutely answer that question. I can say that we have an 0800 number where people can ring into a call centre. As we develop answers for questions like that, they'll be available for call centre staff. If the answers aren't available, we'll be obviously working out answers and getting back to people. That 0800 number is listed in the COVID-19 website for those who don't have the technology to look at that. It's 0800 779 997. That's 0800 779 997. I suspect that's going to get fairly heavily rung in the next little while, and the call centre capacity is currently being beefed up for the anticipated increase in demand. So apologies if people can't get through immediately.
And then just going back to how many people are coming into the country, do you have any numbers on sort of how many people are coming in and what they're expected to get to by the end of the 4-week period?
There is some work being done on that. I wonder if, Mike, is that one that you wanted to talk about? Or? Yeah,
I can't give absolute detail. I know it's decreasing. We know how many people are offshore. We don't know how many of them want to come back. It's decreasing almost in the thousands daily.
So about a ballpark figure of how many people came into the country yesterday? Or
a few days ago, I think it was 7,000, but I would like to check those facts before we run them.
You're very senior public servants. Most of you are here for Christchurch. Is this the most significant challenge New Zealand has faced in peacetime?
Well, actually somebody asked me the other day how this compared with the Christchurch experience I had, and I'd have to say this is bigger, significantly.
And we are leaving that press conference now. That was the All-of-Government Controller, John Ombler, who is heading up the national response from the government on COVID-19. Also speaking there was Sarah Stewart-Black, the Director of Civil Defence, and the outgoing Police Commissioner, Mike Bush. I'm Lisa Owen, and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National for this lockdown special. We will be with you until 7 p.m. this evening. Coming up, Australia also takes action to further restrict the movement of people there to contain the spread of COVID-19. We'll talk to the Prime Minister's Chief Science Advisor and the Education Minister, Chris Hipkins. Plus, we should tell you there has been a huge spike in phone calls and is putting massive pressure on phone lines. So if you are trying to reach someone and you can't get through, try again later. You can text us on 2101 if you have questions, and we will do our best to get answers for you. You can also tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can Facebook us at Checkpoint, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Let's go now to the headlines with Paul.
Thank you, Lisa. New Zealand is heading into coronavirus lockdown for the next 4 weeks. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern is raising the COVID alert level to 3, and within 48 hours it will be level 4. Supermarkets are begging people to shop normally and stop panic buying. The Finance Minister has assured New Zealanders they will continue to receive some form of income while the country is in lockdown. And the Police Commissioner says restrictions will be enforced if necessary as the government prepares to invoke nationwide measures to contain the spread of COVID-19. Those are the latest headlines. Our next news with Susanna at 5.
It is 4:31 and I'm Lisa Owen. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National for this lockdown special. We will be staying on air until 7 o'clock this evening. Go hard and go early or risk losing tens of thousands of lives. The Prime Minister said today that it was time to ramp up the nation's response to COVID-19 to stop its spread. She said whilst New Zealand was some way behind other countries in terms of the number of cases, New Zealand needed to act quickly to contain it.
We currently have 102 cases, but so did Italy once. Now the virus has overwhelmed their health system and hundreds of people are dying every day. The situation here is moving at pace, and so must we. We have always said we would act early, decisively, and go hard, and we will. Today, 36 new cases were announced. While the majority of these cases continue to be linked to overseas travel in some way, I can also confirm, as did the Director General of Health, that we have 2 cases where public health officials have been unable to find how they came in contact with COVID-19. On that basis, we now consider there is transmission within our communities. If community transmission takes off in New Zealand, the number of cases will double every 5 days. If that happens unchecked, our health system will be inundated and tens of thousands of New Zealanders will die.
The Prime Minister said now is the time to act, and the only way to reduce the spread of the virus was for people to stay home. She went on to explain what alert levels 3 and 4 mean.
Let me set out what this will mean for everyone in practical terms. Supermarkets, doctors, pharmacies, service stations, access to essential banking services will be available throughout New Zealand at every alert level. If you do not have immediate needs, do not go to the supermarket. It will be there for you today, it will be there for you tomorrow, and the day after that. We must give time for supermarkets to restock their shelves. There will be enough for everyone if we shop normally. Stock is not an issue in New Zealand. We will not run out of food. In the meantime, we will be working through practices like those used overseas to make sure that when people are visiting essential services, that we are maintaining social distance at all times. Non-essential businesses in New Zealand must now close. All bars, restaurants, cafes, cinemas, pools, museums, libraries, playgrounds, any other place where the public congregate must close their face-to-face function. Over the next 48 hours, those who provide, for instance, takeaway services must move to close their operations also. All indoor and outdoor events cannot proceed. In short, we are all now preparing as a nation to go into self-isolation in the same way that we have seen many other countries do. Staying at home is essential. It's a simple but highly effective way to constrain the virus. It denies it a place to go and will help give our healthcare system a fighting chance. Over the next 48 hours, every workplace must implement alternative ways of working. People must work from home so that interactions with others are limited. Essential services will need to put in place alternative ways of working that ensure physical distancing of staff of 2 metres or utilise appropriate personal protective equipment.
And the Prime Minister said schools would be closed from tomorrow.
Except to the children of essential workers such as doctors, nurses, ambulance drivers, police, and there will be others on that list. This will give them time to plan, but it will be temporary. Schools will close entirely from midnight on Wednesday. The school term will be brought forward. For the remainder of the term, schools will establish ways to teaching online and remotely. All students across the country are currently being given information on this decision for their parents, including the list of who is considered an essential service. This will be communicated directly to parents as well. To be absolutely clear, we are now asking all New Zealanders who are outside essential services to stay at home and to stop all interaction with others outside of those in your household. I understand that self-isolation is a daunting prospect, so we are being practical. You can leave your home for fresh air, a walk, for exercise, to take your children outside, but please remember this simple principle. It must be solitary. We are asking you only spend time with those you are in self-isolation with. And if you are outside, keep your distance from others. That means 2 metres at all times.
Jacinda Ardern also said that travel around New Zealand would be about to change.
Over the next 48 hours, people will need to go home, be it locally or throughout the country. We have asked all air transport providers to ensure social distancing for that period. After 48 hours, we'll be moving to air travel only applying to the transport of people undertaking essential services and the transport of freight. Public transport will also begin to transition over the next 48 hours and will only be available for those working in essential services for medical reasons and to move essential goods, including ferry services between the North and South Island. Further details on the transition we are all now making will be made publicly available on the Covid-19 website. Now I want to share with you what will happen while we are all in Alert Level 4 to get ahead of COVID-19. We will continue to vigorously contact trace every single case. Testing will continue at pace to help us understand the current number of cases in New Zealand and where they are based. If we flush out the cases we already have and see transmission slow, we will potentially be able to move areas out of Level 4 over time. But for the next wee while, things will look worse before they look better. In the short term, the number of cases will likely rise because the virus is already in our community. But these new measures can slow the virus down and prevent our health system from being overwhelmed and ultimately save lives. To be successful, though, to stop community transmission, which does have a lag time, these measures will need to be in place for 4 weeks. Again, I want to reiterate to you, you will be able to make regular visits to essential services in that time. Your supermarkets will not close. Your pharmacy and pharmaceutical products will be available. You will be able to access medical services. If we, after those 4 weeks, have been successful, I hope then we will be able to ease these restrictions. If we haven't, we'll find ourselves living with them for longer. That is why sticking to the rules matters. If we don't, if you hang out with your friend at a park or see a family member for lunch, you risk spreading COVID-19 and extending the nation's time in level 4.
The Prime Minister said our low number of cases compared to the rest of the world gives New Zealand a chance, but doesn't mean the country has escaped.
But I wanted to share with you the stark choice that we have faced as government. Medical modelling considered by Cabinet today suggests that without the measures I have just announced, up to tens of thousands of New Zealanders could die from COVID-19. Everything you will all give up for the next few weeks, all of the lost contact with others, all of the isolation and difficult time entertaining children, it will literally save lives, thousands of lives. The worst case scenario is simply intolerable. It would represent the greatest loss of New Zealanders' lives in our history, and I will not take that chance. I would rather make this decision now and save those lives and be in lockdown for a shorter period than delay, see New Zealanders lose loved ones and their contact with each other for an even longer period. I hope that you are all with me on that decision. Together we do have an opportunity to contain the spread and to prevent the worst. I cannot stress enough the need for every New Zealander to follow the advice I've laid out for you today. As a government, we will, and I hope you have seen this, we will do everything in our power to protect you. Now I'm asking you to do everything you can to protect all of us. None of us can do this alone. Your actions will be critical to our collective ability to stop COVID-19. Failure of anyone to play their part in coming days will put the lives of others at risk, and there will be no tolerance for that. We will not hesitate to use our enforcement powers if needed. We are in this together. I'm in no doubt that the measures I've announced today will cause unprecedented economic and social disruption, but they are necessary. I have one final message. Be kind. I know people will want to act as enforcers, and I understand that. People are afraid and they are anxious. But we will play the role of enforcer. What we need from you, our community, is you to support others. Go home tonight and check on your neighbours. Start a phone tree with your street. Plan how you'll keep in touch with one another. We will get through this together, but only if we stick together. So please be strong and be kind.
That was Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern. Meanwhile, the Finance Minister Grant Robertson said lifting the alert level from 2 to 4 means every New Zealand business will be impacted in some way. He said the $150,000 cap on the wage subsidy scheme would be lifted removed altogether, and businesses would be eligible, all businesses. He said whilst New Zealanders might not be able to work, it was important that they had an income. Mr Robertson said the scheme itself had changed.
Businesses that are less than a year old and firms that have had significant increase in revenue in the past year are now also eligible. They will need to demonstrate revenue loss against a similar time period, for example, a 30% loss of income as a result of COVID-19 in March 2020 compared to January 2020. Self-employed people with variable monthly incomes are also now eligible if they can demonstrate the revenue loss against the previous year's monthly average. The scheme also covers registered charities, non-government organisations, incorporated societies and post-settlement governance entities. The expansion of the scheme outlined today takes the estimated cost of the wage subsidy scheme from $5.1 billion to $9.3 billion. The second decision that we have taken today is to freeze rent increases and to look to extend no-cause terminations to protect people during this difficult time. We'll release more details of how we will operationalise that in the coming days. We know that for many New Zealanders, paying the rent is one of the biggest weekly bills they face, and we want to ensure that we ease any pressure on that. And thirdly, today, the Government, the Reserve Bank and our retail banks have agreed in principle to a business financing guarantee scheme to help cushion the impact of COVID-19. The scheme would leverage the Crown's balance sheet to enable banks to extend lending to firms which would otherwise be viable. In addition, the Government, the Reserve Bank and our retail banks have also agreed in principle to significant support for mortgage holders. Meetings are taking place as we speak to finalise the details on this, which will also be announced in the coming couple of days. We are also making urgent preparations for further income support for all workers as we move into alert number 4. I want to say directly to employers and employees at this difficult time, please take the time to work through your options. Talk to one another, get in touch with your bank and together make a plan. We will make sure that all New Zealanders continue to receive some form of income through this period. The priority of our government is the health and well-being of our people, and we will do what it takes to keep everybody safe. We are all in this together. He waka e ka noa.
Finance Minister Grant Robertson. And Brett O'Reilly from the Employers and Manufacturers Association will join us at around 5:15 this evening. It is 4:45 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National for this lockdown special. We're with you through until 7 p.m. this evening. If you're just joining us, the country will go into full lockdown from Wednesday as a proactive, aggressive response to Covid-19. From tomorrow, schools will close, and by Wednesday, all businesses, restaurants, bars and gyms will be forced to close too. Supermarkets, pharmacies, medical services and gas stations are exempt and will remain open. The lockdown will last for at least 4 weeks. You will have questions and we'll try to get answers for you. There have been issues with phone lines this afternoon, but you can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Well, joining me now from our studio in Parliament is Jane Patterson, our political editor. Jane, why now? This is a pretty aggressive move.
The Prime Minister has said that there is a very small window that New Zealand has to get on top of the virus and stop any further spread. They clearly believe there is community transmission now in New Zealand, and the Prime Minister said that medical modelling that the Cabinet received today was that if they didn't act now without these measures, tens of thousands of New Zealanders could die. She is still issuing hope in terms of that if people take the rules seriously, if they do what they're being told or asked to, then New Zealand may avoid some of the outbreaks that we're seeing overseas. But that is by no means a given, as we have the next 48 hours to prepare to go into full lockdown.
It is an extraordinary situation. So what do we know about the conversations that were had in that Cabinet meeting, how much information they had to make those decisions, and whether they were all on the same page?
Look, I think it would have been a combination of obviously the official advice that they got in those 2 cases in Auckland and Wairarapa that were now treated as community transmission would have been one trigger. The other information that they would have been heeding was, of course, the spread. What do they need to do? And we now had the level system, level 3 to level 4, that would lay out exactly what the response should be. And of course, we've had a huge amount of debate from the medical community, from other politicians about what New Zealand needed to do. Now, Cabinet Ministers can't be swayed by that completely, otherwise they'd never be able to make a decision. But there was certainly a very strong call, even this morning, yesterday, and really intensifying this morning, especially with that open letter from the doctors saying we must move now to contain it. So they had about a 2-hour Cabinet meeting. We've also just had a briefing, as you played, from the senior police officers now in charge of that side of things, and some details coming out there about what transport might look like. Lots of questions to them, very practical questions. For example, if people don't have a car and rely on public transport to get to the supermarket or to the pharmacy, that will still be available to them, but only for those essential services. So there are lots of little fish hooks here that people are going to have to figure out how it applies to them over the next 48 hours.
And obviously, as you're talking about, there are significant consequences, but just in the most simple way, that everything is going to have to shut up shop, bar those essential services. So in combination with this announcement, we had Grant Robertson, bolstering the business package. To what extent?
it's almost doubled in terms of that wage subsidy, which was one of the key elements of the package that was announced last week. Initially, the package had been at $5 billion, and that was basically would cover fully businesses with about 21 employees. Now, other businesses could have applied for the money, but they would have only had about 20 employees covered. So a lot of larger or medium businesses wouldn't have been able to benefit from it at all. Going into a fully 4-week and potentially longer lockdown, huge implications for people's incomes, and the government's main priority is making sure that people have some kind of income and, of course, avoiding a complete economic collapse. So that business support part, the wage subsidy, has gone from $5 billion to $9.3 billion. The cap has been lifted. All businesses are eligible, including those self-employed. And there are some other important things going on along the side. There's a lot of work going on with banks so that people who are going to be struggling with rental mortgages might be able to get some help in that area. Rent increases, there's been a freeze put on that. So really the government trying to look at every single element of where people might really struggle and say, here's some help. And Mr Robertson did say there will be further measures as well as we proceed through the coming weeks.
Just quickly before we go, in practical terms, what does this actually mean for the operation of Parliament?
So Parliament will resume on Wednesday, and basically it's just going to come together to pass essential business. Now, one of those is an epidemic notice that the Prime Minister has to issue to be able to put these powers in force, and also some crucial legislation that keeps the money flowing, that will enable them to get this money for the support package through. Parliament will adjourn on Wednesday once that business has been done, and then it is adjourned indefinitely. We do not have a resumption date for Parliament as yet.
Thanks, Jane. That is our political editor, Jane Patterson. Let's head over to Australia now, and the Australian government has taken action to further restrict the movement of people to contain the spread of Covid-19. In the next couple of hours, places where people gather like bars, restaurants and gyms will close indefinitely. Some state borders are closing, while New South Wales, Victoria and the ACT are set to finish the school term early. The Prime Minister says the extra measures are regrettable, but a result of Australians not taking the situation seriously. The ABC's Rhett Burney has the details.
As coronavirus cases continue to climb in Australia, authorities are grappling with another condition: complacency. This surfer was one of dozens who defied the closure at Bondi Beach, taking to the water and taking aim at the media.
I don't believe the stuff I'm seeing and reading, but I don't know what you guys are doing. A lot of it's bullshit, I reckon.
George Shales is the president of Surf Lifesaving New South Wales.
It's becoming quite challenging for us. Our lifesavers are actually starting to be harassed, which is absolutely unacceptable from my position. Some of our beaches are actually, our lifesavers are actually withdrawing from patrols.
States and territories are starting to shut down non-essential services. Some have closed their borders. It's all an attempt to enforce social distancing in a bid to slow the spread of coronavirus. So, will it work? Professor Julie Leask is a social scientist at the University of Sydney. She specialises in critical public health messaging.
Right now, I don't think it's clear to everybody exactly what they should be doing. So the simple awareness of what is recommended right now is difficult for some people to get. And this is a very confusing, difficult time for people as these messages are changing constantly, and the social expectations of what people should do are going to vary so much.
So how do governments and health authorities get people to not only listen to, but follow their advice? Professor Leask says it starts with setting expectations.
Some of the messaging that's missing a lot at the moment from government is around what we can expect, what sort of scenarios we can expect into the next few months.
She says research shows that method works.
There's research to show that if you, what they call psychologically prime people to do something, they're more likely to do it. So if you tell people, I'm going to be sending you a survey in a week's time, they're more likely to complete the survey and send it back than if you just give it to them cold.
Sydney University's Professor Julie Leask ending that report from Rhett Burney. The pandemic is now affecting more than 160 countries and has claimed more than 14,000 lives. Italy has seen 651 new virus deaths in the last 24-hour period, in comparison with almost 800 on Saturday. A critical week lies ahead to see if the infection curve continues to flatten. Residents of the worst-hit region, Lombardy, have been adjusting to life, where all outside activity has been banned. The BBC's Sema Kotecha has more.
Every day, it gets quieter here. Now even hotels are closing after the government ordered all non-essential businesses to shut down. Another move that turns this tourist city into something like a ghost town. Hotel proprietors are anxious about what lies ahead.
On a financial level, let's hope the state helps us in some way. If they don't, it will definitely be very worrying.
But on the other hand, she's keen to isolate.
We don't know who's positive with coronavirus. Even we could be infecting people who come to stay with us.
Thousands of doctors from across Italy have applied to be part of a task force working in the worst affected areas. Here in Rome, a moving tribute to all those working in hospitals trying to save lives. It says, "We stand with you." Planes with extra medical supplies have arrived from Russia to help hospitals here cope with the rising death toll. In an attempt to slow the spread of the virus, in some regions, people are no longer allowed to go more than a few hundred metres from their homes. It seems as if Europe has stopped, and each day with new death figures, it feels that little bit more still.
And that's the BBC's Sema Kotecha reporting there. And in the United States, President Trump has approved emergency medical help for the states of New York, Washington and California, all coronavirus hotspots. There are more than 33,000 cases of the coronavirus in the US. During a White House briefing, the president said Americans are enduring a great national trial. President Trump says extra money will go to funding field hospitals, offering thousands of extra beds and many more tests. The president says Navy ships are being sent to Los Angeles and will also provide medical services.
In addition to large quantities of supplies, I've also directed FEMA to supply the following: 4 large federal medical stations with 1,000 beds for New York, 8 large federal medical stations with 2,000 beds for California, and 3 large federal medical stations and 4 small federal medical stations with 1,000 beds for the state of Washington. This action will give them maximum flexibility to use the guard against the virus without having to worry about costs or liability, and freeing up state resources to protect the health and safety of the people in their state. The federal government has deployed hundreds of tons of supplies from our national stockpile to locations with the greatest need. In order to assist in those areas, I approved the state of New York's request for a major disaster declaration, something which Governor Cuomo has been asking for and which I agree, and we had it done in very rapid fashion.
The BBC's Peter Bowes says the president was under a lot of pressure to respond to the criticisms about a shortage of medical supplies.
Yeah, this has been the real big complaint from state governors, from mayors around the country, that they felt as if they weren't getting enough federal help from the Trump administration to provide those facilities, the ventilators, the masks, the medical gowns that are so urgently needed. And Bill de Blasio, the mayor of New York City, had a really dire warning that he said within days people who could have been saved may well die because of a lack of those supplies. Well, it was only a few hours that President Trump actually came forward and said that those supplies were on the way. There was a truck heading to New York City. There's that medical ship heading to the port of Los Angeles. It'll have a hospital in Los Angeles, and it'll alleviate the pressure on other medical facilities on land.
That's the BBC's Peter Bowes there. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National for this lockdown special. We're with you until 7 tonight. And after 5, we'll speak to the Prime Minister's Chief Science Advisor. We'll also talk to the Education Minister. And we'll be speaking to Countdown about new, rules that they'll be implementing at the supermarket. We are currently at level 3. The Prime Minister has said we will go to level 4 on Wednesday. All schools will be closed from tomorrow, but by Wednesday, all businesses, restaurants, bars and gyms will have to close too. The only exceptions will be essential services. That will include healthcare, defence, supermarkets and food providers will all be exempt. At this stage, the lockdown will last for at least 4 weeks. During this time, the Prime Minister says she will remain in Wellington and she has said she is not afraid because New Zealand has a plan. Transport will be limited as well. Air travel will be reserved for freight and essential personnel movements. People are being asked to stay home and stop socialising outside of their family unit.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leatawa tēnei. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says without nationwide self-isolation, tens of thousands of New Zealanders could die from Covid-19. This afternoon, the alert level was raised to level 3 and will be raised to level 4 in 2 days. At this time, everyone, apart from essential service workers, must be in self-isolation for a minimum of 4 weeks. Ms Ardern says she doesn't underestimate the enormity of what the government is asking, but there is a window of opportunity to break the chain and prevent New Zealand heading the same way as countries like Italy.
Everything you will all give up for the next few weeks, all of the lost contact with others, all of the isolation and difficult time entertaining children, it will literally save lives. Thousands of lives. The worst case scenario is simply intolerable. It would represent the greatest loss of New Zealanders' lives in our history.
Once the alert level is raised to level 4, all schools and everyone apart from essential workers will need to stay home. People will still be able to go to essential services like the supermarket and pharmacy, but must keep their distance from people. Ms Ardern says she understands this is a daunting prospect.
You can leave your home for fresh air, a walk, for exercise, to take your children outside. But please remember this simple principle. It must be solitary. We're asking you only spend time with those you are in self-isolation with. And if you are outside, keep your distance from others.
Jacinda Ardern says these measures to work and to ensure they are not in place for a long period of time, it is vital people stick to the rules. The Police Commissioner says restrictions will be enforced if necessary as the government prepares to invoke nationwide measures to contain the spread of Covid-19. Mike Bush, who's leading the operational response to Covid-19, says more police will be on the street immediately. He says the Defence Force is on standby and it has been asked to provide a stocktake of immediately available resources if they're needed.
We don't want to get to a place where we have to enforce these restrictions, but we will if required. And if we require extra people to work alongside us, the Chief of Defence is very happy to stand up his people.
Police Commissioner Mike Bush. Supermarkets are begging people to shop normally and stop panic buying. Kitty Hannafin from Woolworths and Countdown says that supermarkets nationwide are being hammered.
I am asking New Zealand to please not go to the supermarket. We will be open right through this. We will stand with New Zealand in the next month or so. We'll be open every single day to look after you. There is plenty of food in our country. We are so blessed for how plentiful we are. Shop normally. Do not stockpile or panic buy today because it will break our supply chain.
Kitty Hannafin says the run on the supermarkets will now cause unnecessary shortages. The Finance Minister has assured New Zealanders they will continue to receive some form of income while the country is in lockdown. Grant Robertson this afternoon announced a dramatic expansion of the wage subsidy scheme, removing the $150,000 cap per business. He says work is urgently underway to secure Kiwis' incomes and more details will be unveiled in the coming days.
We will make sure that all New Zealanders continue to receive some form of income through this period. The priority of our government is the health and well-being of our people, and we will do what it takes to keep everybody safe. We are all in this together.
Grant Robertson. The local share market has closed down to its lowest point in 2 years, with an across-the-board drop in the value of New Zealand's biggest companies. The benchmark Top 50 index was down more than 10% in late afternoon trading and recovered a bit to end down 7.6%, its biggest single-session fall since the market crash in 1987. Nearly every listed company fell, with tourism, travel and hospitality businesses showing some of the biggest falls. The interest rates for longer-dated government bonds have fallen sharply as a result of the Reserve Bank's $30 billion buyback scheme, and the New Zealand dollar is down more than 1% against most major currencies as investors sell off risky assets. It's 5:04. Australia and Canada won't send their athletes if this year's Tokyo Olympics take place as scheduled. The International Olympic Committee is ruling out cancellation, but will discuss postponing the July 24th start date, announcing a deadline of 4 weeks to make a decision. The Australian Olympic Committee has told its athletes to prepare for the Games to take place during next year's Northern Hemisphere summer, while Canada is calling on the IOC to postpone for 1 year. The New Zealand Olympic Committee President Mike Stanley is urging the IOC to make a speedy decision and says a postponement to October or next year are the most likely options.
If you look at the Japanese seasons, probably October is as late as you might get a game. And then the difficulty of actually having all of the complex arrangements recreated in 2021 is a major undertaking, and there are other major events in that year as well. For example, the FIFA World Cup.
The NZOC President Mike Stanley. The chairman of the Australian Rugby League Commission says all 16 NRL teams could be relocated to a central Queensland town to keep the competition running. The NRL is yet to join many other sports competitions around the world and postpone or cancel because of the Covid-19 pandemic. League chairman Peter V'landys says they're exploring the possibility of housing more than 500 players and coaching staff in a purpose-built village in the central Queensland town of Calliope. Announcements are yet to be made about the future of Super Rugby and football's A-League. That's the news.
This is the latest public health message from the Ministry of Health. The government has announced that effective immediately, New Zealand will be moving to level 3 on the COVID-19 alert system. Physical distancing of 2 metres should be observed when you are outside of your home. The public will continue to have access to essential services such as supermarkets, hospitals and pharmacies when we move to level 4. All educational facilities and early childhood education ECE centres will close, except for a small provision for the children of essential workers. Restrictions will be put in place for travel between regions, apart from people returning to their home or accessing essential services. Additional border measures will be imposed for returning New Zealanders, including the requirement to self-isolate in the city you arrive in. For further information, please visit covid19.govt.nz.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Taranaki, including Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Periods of rain today, possible thunderstorms and localised downpours. A few showers tomorrow, mainly in the west. Gisborne, scattered rain, clearing tomorrow morning. For the remainder of the North Island, showers becoming frequent from the afternoon, possibly heavy with thunderstorms, especially in the west, then clearing to fine weather overnight. Nelson and Marlborough, showers about the western ranges, spreading throughout for a time tonight, possibly heavy and thundery. Canterbury and North Otago, brief heavy rain spreading north with a strong cold southerly change, then fine weather. For the remainder of Otago, Southland and Buller through to Fiordland, showers, some heavy with small hail today, snow above 500 metres in the south tonight. Chatham Islands, periods of rain or drizzle, clearing for a time. That's the news.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. We are on air tonight until 7 o'clock in a special lockdown program to explain to you all you need to know about what is about to happen. The country has 2 days to prepare for a month-long lockdown, with nationwide restrictions due to officially begin on Wednesday. The Prime Minister announced the extraordinary move this afternoon. Effective immediately, the country is now at alert level 3, meaning from tomorrow, all public places, with the exception of essential services, have to close. Our political reporter Jo Moyer has this story.
The government has made a staggered announcement today to give both it and New Zealanders time to come to terms with and prepare for a full lockdown. From tomorrow, all bars, restaurants, cafes, gyms, cinemas, pools, museums, libraries and other public places where people gather have to close. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern broke the news from Parliament at 1:30 this afternoon.
That effective immediately, we will move to alert level 3 nationwide. After 48 hours, the time required to ensure essential services are in place, we will move to level 4.
The lockdown means isolation across the board.
To be absolutely clear, we are now asking all New Zealanders who are outside essential services to stay at home and to stop all interaction with others outside of those in your household.
The announcement comes after 2 cases of community transmission of Covid-19 were confirmed by the Director General of Health earlier today. Without these measures, Ms Ardern says the consequences would be devastating.
The worst case scenario is simply intolerable. It would represent the greatest loss of New Zealanders' lives in our history, and I will not take that chance.
Ms Ardern hopes doing the extraordinary will mean the lockdown only needs to be in place for 4 weeks.
If we, after those 4 weeks, have been successful, I hope then we will be able to ease these restrictions. If we haven't, we'll find ourselves living with them for longer. That is why sticking to the rules matters.
The Prime Minister stressed again today that supermarkets, pharmacies and essential medical services will stay open throughout and people can continue to shop normally. Businesses providing takeaway services will need to close and the school holidays are being brought forward to reduce the impact on students. Air and sea travel and public transport will continue for 48 hours with social distancing in place. Once lockdown is enforced, those services will only be for essential workers. On Tuesday, the Finance Minister Grant Robertson announced a $12.1 billion package for businesses and beneficiaries, but the change in circumstances means it's now been boosted. Wage subsidies will now be available for all, taking the $5.1 billion allocation up to $9.3 billion.
Cabinet today agreed to remove the $150,000 cap altogether. All businesses, self-employed, contractors and other organisations that I'll outline shortly will be eligible.
And he's also taken further steps.
The second decision that we have taken today is to freeze rent increases and to look to extend no-cause terminations to protect people during this difficult time.
Schools will be mostly closed from tomorrow, except for the children of essential workers like doctors, nurses, ambulance drivers and police. But that will only be temporary. Schools and early childhood centres will be closed completely from midnight Wednesday. Universities have been told to close as soon as they can. The Education Minister Chris Hipkins says the government needs everyone to cooperate.
Work is underway to prepare for online learning in all educational settings where that is appropriate and where that can be delivered consistent with the self-isolation requirements that have been set out.
Jacinda Ardern says for the next 4 weeks things will look worse before they look better. And she's acknowledging how daunting self-isolation will be for people.
Think about small things that you can do to maintain that contact without being face-to-face, because that will be one of the greatest hurdles we have to overcome, is looking after each other from behind closed doors.
Ms Ardern says mental health services will be a priority throughout this period. People can continue to get fresh air and go for a walk and talk to neighbours. The key is to do it from a distance. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Joe Moyer.
Supermarkets are among the essential services that will continue to operate during the level 4 lockdown. And the government's urging people not to panic buy over the coming days. They say there is plenty of food to go around. Pharmacies and other food supply chain operators are also among the long list of services that will keep running. But news that New Zealand would be increasing restrictions over the coming days prompted hundreds of people to head to Henderson Pack and Save this afternoon. Our reporter Nita Blake-Person and cameraman Nick Monroe spoke to some of them from a distance of 2 metres, and here's what they had to say.
All I see is school shut down, chaos, and I just really wanted to get to the supermarket before, just to make sure that we got enough food.
to see us through.
So I listened to the sort of the news report and thought, how are we going to fill our time with 4 weeks? So I went and bought some paint and we're going to redo our garage, pretty much, is why we're here, and I think why everyone else is in there as well.
I have a second grandchild on the way. My daughter's 39 weeks and a bit pregnant, and we have a 1-year-old. So the reason I've come out is to get nappies and formula and essential supplies for the babies, basically.
I think I've got enough supplies, but I think in my head, like, oh, what if I just need this, and this, and then I'll get, and that'll be better. But in reality, I think I'm just making up more lists in my head as we go, just because I'm in panic mode.
A bit anxious about this all, because I've got one of every category that's most vulnerable in my household. I've got 10 in my household, which is my mother-in-law, my mother, my sister-in-law who's handicapped and has health issues, as well as my grandson as well. So trying to be really vigilant and making sure that none of them get affected. But it's a scary thought.
I was feeling all good until today, really. I feel really anxious, but kind of not sort of dwelling on it and feel like we're in safe hands, and if, my family does the right thing, we'll be all right.
I'm a little bit concerned that my grandchild is about to arrive in the middle of all of this, but I'm confident that we're taking the right steps, so I'll do what I need to do.
Just to stay positive and stay indoors and keep our kids safe.
Follow the rules and stay safe, stay home and love your family, really.
Let's be sensible, Yeah, I've come shopping, but I've just bought what I would normally buy. And if we all stay calm, we should be okay.
Well, just to keep well, stay safe, and keep an ear out for any news as well.
Stay home. Don't go out unless you really, really, really have to. And wear your protection and stay away from people.
And that was our reporter Nita Blake-Person and cameraman Nick Munro speaking to people outside an Auckland supermarket at a safe distance, I might add. Now, we are having real problems with the phone lines tonight. There is huge pressure on the phone system. Some of those impacted by the lockdown today will be our elderly, and Simon Wallace is the Chief Executive of the New Zealand Aged Care Association and joins us now. Simon, first thing I'm wondering if you can clarify is whether the caregivers in these homes are considered to be essential workers.
Lisa, that's what we've been working today to establish. We absolutely need clarity around whether our caregivers or healthcare assistants who are so critical to the health and well-being of our older people, whether they are essential workers. And the real practicalities of that will mean, how are these people going to get to and from work? Are they going to need a permit or a certificate to be able to do that? So we absolutely need clarity on that, and we've been pressing the government today to get that clarity, and we haven't had it as yet.
So how challenging do you think staffing will be? The lockdown obviously is one issue, but as staff, we're coming into winter months, if your staff are ill, they can't come to work. How much of a challenge is it going to be getting the number of people you might need?
I think what we've seen today with the situation of a resident testing positive to COVID-19 in a Hamilton rest home really illustrates how a single case actually results in a large proportion of our staff having to self-isolate. So we've seen 27 of our staff having to self-isolate from that rest home alone, and that puts enormous pressure on other staff who are filling in and doing extra shifts. So you can just see what one case alone creates for our staff. We need some things to happen, and we need some things to happen really quickly. So there is the issue around clarity of our essential workers, but we have migrant workers as well, many of whom are on temporary visas and are going to be sent home unless the government moves immediately to end the stand down so they can stay here. They are essential health workers, and we need a decision on that also.
Simon, what percentage of your workers would you think are people who are on visas, temporary visas here?
So we have 30,000 registered nurses and caregivers working in the aged residential care industry, and roughly 30% of those are on some type of visa. We've had people turn back from the border returning to New Zealand, and of course we have the issue that I've just mentioned about people who are on temporary work permits here.
So are you asking, to be clear, the Immigration Minister, in essence, to roll these visas over so people can keep working in aged care at this time?
We have a medical emergency, and as many as 1,700 of those migrant workers are scheduled to be sent home from August, when we can afford to lose them. Medium, longer term, we can look at pick up and train workers from other sectors where jobs are being lost. But that takes some time to do that training, and those workers also need to be willing to come into our sector. I mean, Lisa, our staff are our biggest asset, and our employers are doing everything. They're doing absolute utmost to support them. But they've got to have the support around policy and immigration settings to make that happen. And they also need to be able to have access to all the tools and equipment that they need to do their job. And when I say that, I mean the personal protective equipment.
So what is the situation in rest homes then at the moment? Do you have that equipment or not?
Largely we do, and over the last couple of weeks there has been a concerted effort by district health boards to engage with our rest homes and make that equipment available. But if we have an outbreak of COVID-19 in a rest home, we are going to need a lot of equipment, and we're not satisfied that we have the access to all the equipment that we need, and we need to get those reassurances from the government on that.
So have you had conversations with the DHBs? Because when you raised this issue, it must be 3 weeks ago now, the comment was made from government that each individual DHB would deal with that.
Yes, and as I said, there has been really good progress made on that. But I will just repeat what I said before. If we have an outbreak of COVID-19 in the rest home, we are going to need a lot of equipment, and we need reassurances that we can have access to that equipment wherever and whenever we need it.
So at the moment, the full lockdown comes into force within 48 hours, but a number of facilities were already restricting people coming in and out. What is this going to mean for elderly people who are now, shut off physically from their families? Absolutely.
So our facilities are not in lockdown. We have, as you noted, we have got very strict visitor protocols and restricted visitor access. So we are allowing visitors into facilities, for example, when a resident may be dying. We're not sure what that will mean in 48 hours' time for our rest homes, and it's another issue for which we need clarity on. But this is extremely hard on families. This is extremely hard on residents, and our staff are right in the middle of that and dealing with those issues as best they can.
So, Simon, are you investigating whether there will be compassionate grounds to let people have, to come and visit a person who may be nearing the end of their life?
That's what's happening now, Lisa. But this whole thing is dynamic, as you know, and it's a moving feast. We don't know what will happen in 48 hours' time, but that's certainly the case. That's certainly how it's working at the moment.
What is your take on the closing down of the schools, in the sense that your workforce works shifts, obviously, and then children are not going to be at school, which raises issues for caregivers? How are you going to manage that?
Well, that's another issue that came to our attention a couple of weeks ago, and we've been raising it with the government. So, yes, we have caregivers and we have nurses who need to look after children, and already some of them are calling into work or have been calling into work because they don't want to send their children to school. So again, it goes back to the clarity around an aged care worker, whether they are a nurse or a caregiver or someone who is in the kitchen, a kitchen hand or a cleaner. They are all essential health workers in aged care, and we need that clarity for all those reasons that I've outlined.
Really appreciate you joining us this evening. That is Simon Wallace, who's the Chief Executive of the New Zealand Aged Care Association. It is 23 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National for this lockdown special through until 7 o'clock tonight. If you're just joining us, the country will go into full lockdown from midnight Wednesday as a proactive, aggressive response to COVID-19. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern said without upgrading to alert level 4 quickly, tens of thousands of New Zealanders could die. From tomorrow, schools will close, and by Wednesday, all businesses, restaurants, bars and gyms will also be forced to close their doors. Supermarkets, pharmacies, medical services and gas stations are exempt and will remain open. The lockdown will last for at least 4 weeks. You will have questions, no doubt. We will try and get some answers for you. There have been issues with the phone lines this afternoon, but you can always text us on 2101, tweet us at checkpointrnz or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. At this point, there is cause for alarm, and that's why such drastic measures have been taken so early. The words of the Prime Minister's Chief Science Advisor, Juliette Gerard. I spoke to her about the worldwide measures that will hopefully curb the rate of transmission here.
What we've been hearing about over the last few months, few weeks, and particularly in the last few days, is the uncontrolled growth of the COVID-19 in different countries. And all scientists all over the world have been charting the progress of the virus and have a pretty good idea now, beyond the predictions, the scenarios that were put out by modelers, that the reasonable worst case scenario of it really running away and overwhelming health systems is coming true. And so the science advice has been strengthening by the day over the last few weeks, that the way to act is to get ahead of those curves. And so the plan was that as soon as we had any sign of community transmission, we would put in the extreme measures rather than wait until we had a health system that was really struggling to cope with these huge spikes of cases that we've seen overseas.
So the Prime Minister said if we did not do this, that it could potentially result in tens of thousands of deaths. What is she basing those projections on?
These are reasonable worst-case scenarios. So all over the world, we've been connecting not just with local modellers, but also with international modellers in places like the States, Singapore and the UK. What modellers do for a pandemic situation like this is to map out a series of scenarios that might happen. And what's becoming increasingly clear as we look at the experience of other countries is that the reasonable worst-case scenario from, say, January has now become the most likely scenario. So they're not predictions, they're just alarm bells to tell decision makers that they need to act, and they need to act early.
So how do these measures, the lockdown in essence, how do these change the potential outcomes?
Well, in some ways, it's a very daunting prospect to deal with this virus because there's no vaccine and there's no antivirals available yet. But in other ways, it's actually really simple. If everybody stays home and doesn't pass it on to anyone else, we will break those transmission chains. So if you don't do anything, on average around the world, each person that contracts the virus is passing it on to 2 or 3 others. And that's why you're seeing this huge spike in cases. Because if you give it to your friends and they give it to their friends, it doesn't take long to very quickly get to huge numbers, way higher numbers than the health system can cope with. And so what we have to do is something that's very simple, and that's stay home and not pass it on to anybody.
The Prime Minister said we've got a small window of opportunity. How big, or depending on your perspective, how big or how small is that window?
Well, that's something that's been very uncertain. So what we've been doing is just literally monitoring overseas experiences day by day by day and charting our own cases to see which trajectory we're on. And what we hope is that we're on a trajectory of the countries that have tried to eradicate the virus and contained it. So they're places like Taiwan, Hong Kong.
So how do you know that we're more comparable to them than, say, some of the other countries who have experienced a vastly different progression and a much worse progression? How do we know we're in the pool with the countries who have done better?
We don't. And so we need to act now to make sure that we stay on that track. So if you look over the last few days, and many people have been plotting these charts, I've been providing them daily to key decision makers and the Prime Minister, you could see that our cases were starting to grow And the fear is that they're on the same trajectory as places like Australia, the UK, Italy. But there is this window where the cases are still quite small. And so if we act now, we're much more likely to get ahead of it. And Denmark also had that policy. And it's early days because they are quite early in their epidemic. But they put in hard measures early in their curve. And that's resulted in a drop in cases. So there's a growing evidence base that the earlier you go, the more likely you are not to overwhelm your health system.
So I don't want to be alarmist about it, but I'd like us to have an honest conversation. So if we didn't do this, and looking at the modelling that you've been looking at, would we end up in the same position as countries like Italy or the UK that have seen, they're in worse position than what we are now?
Yes, and I think at this point there is cause for alarm, and that's why such drastic measures have been taken so early.
You do think there's cause for alarm?
Well, if we didn't act, there would be cause for alarm, because what happens is that the virus develops relatively slowly compared to some other diseases like flu. There aren't many in terms of per 100 cases that need to be hospitalised. But if you get that sudden spike in cases, then everybody turns up at the hospital at once. So if you look at the experience of the UK and Italy, by the time they're putting in measures, their hospitals are already being overwhelmed because we simply, as a planet, don't have enough ICU capacity to deal with that sudden surge in cases. It's not that the fatality rate is huge, so people have a false sense of security if they hear only 1% of people might die of it. The problem is that all those people turn up at the ICU at once. And what you might notice is that the death rate around the world varies hugely. So in places like Germany and Singapore, it's less than 1%. So starting to get into the territory of a very bad flu. But in countries where the health system's been overwhelmed, like Wuhan was at the very beginning, and how Italy, Spain, France are starting to look now, they're at risk or already are in a situation where there is simply not capacity to put people in the ICU care on the ventilators that they need, and then those people are dying. And then, of course, once the system's overwhelmed, if you have some other emergency, if you had a heart attack or something that was nothing to do with the virus, it's going to start taking longer for your ambulance to arrive, and there won't be a bed for you in the hospital. So all over the world, we're seeing that people that don't act early are getting suddenly to the situation where their hospital systems can't cope.
I know that a stock take of ICU beds has been completed. What position are we in?
Well, at the moment, this isn't really in the realm of science advice, but I know that the people at the Ministry of Health have done that stock take. They know the capacity, and they know that if we don't keep it under control, our systems will be really challenged. And that tells us to do two things. One is act soon to make sure that we don't overwhelm the number we have, and the other is to prepare and create as many possible ICU beds as possible in case it does get out of control. And both those things are happening.
Can you explain in simple terms why the confirmation of community transmission is such a game changer?
Yes, and that's the time to really sound the alarm in terms of watching the science of these epidemics. So all the expert epidemiologists, and you'll have heard Michael Baker in particular, who has been brilliant at raising everyone's awareness of this problem, are worried about is not the number of imported cases, because if an imported case comes in, we know who they are, they've isolated, we know they've got it, maybe they've passed it to one other person in their house that hasn't escaped the household, then the virus won't run away on it. But what's happened over the last couple of days is we've got a suspicion that two of the cases we found, we can't trace back to an obvious overseas trip. And that is a big alarm bell that maybe we're not catching all the cases and that maybe people are picking it up within their community. And so that's why people worry.
Tracking cases is incredibly important then as a consequence of that. Can you see a time where we just simply will not have the resources to trace every contact for every case? And where is that tipping point?
Well, that's another reason to go early. So I'll give you an example of how it's been working so far. The Logan Park school case down in Dunedin. In that case, there was a father who had had overseas travel and a son who was in a school community. And the timing of the returning of the trip from the father meant that it was possible that he hadn't picked it up on his overseas trip. He'd actually picked it up from the sun. And that was a point where flags were raised, and very quickly, every single close contact of the child in the school was tested, because there was a plausible theory that the child had caught it within the classroom and given it to the father. Now, luckily, in that case, all 150 close contacts of the child proved negative. And so that was how we ruled out that that was a community transmission case. And so we're going to have to keep doing that every time we find one. And obviously, if we have an escalating number of cases, we'll quickly swamp resources. So we have to make sure we do it early. In the places where there's widespread community transmission, and we're a long way from there, that's why we're acting early, it becomes not really helpful to contact trace, because once it's in the community, you don't know how to track those cases and you don't know where people have got it from. So it's an urgent need for upscaling resourcing now, and the sooner we do it, the more likely it is that we can catch all the contacts.
Why 4 weeks?
Well, looking at overseas experience, when they have had community transmission, it's taken about that long to track it down and to damp it down. So if everybody stays home and nobody passes it on to their friends, their family, then it might be that after that window we can say there isn't community transmission anywhere in the country, or it might be that we find there's an outbreak localised somewhere, perhaps around one of these stray cases that we've picked up already, and then the rest of us could get back to a kind of level 2 existence where we're being really careful and really cautious and really monitoring the outbreak, but that particular community would still be shut down so that they could deal with their local outbreak. So it's all about making sure that we have enough time to really understand if we have got widespread community transmission or if it's localised, and just do a sweep across the whole country and really understand where the problems lie, and then we can drop back down to lower levels of alert for the rest of the country.
So when you were advising the Prime Minister about this, how broad is your counsel?
Well, what I do is have an open line to any expert that wants to connect with me, and I've certainly been contacted by a large number of people, both here and overseas. And then as early January, actually, the chief science advisors from all around the world had a call because they'd seen what was starting to happen in Wuhan, and we've had a watching brief the whole time. Swap notes, looked at everybody's modelling, looked at everybody's worst case scenarios, and made sure that the very best advice from all around the world is being funneled into what the Prime Minister has access to.
With all your expertise and all that you know, do you believe we have a fair chance of winning in this battle?
Yes, I do. And the thing that gives me most heart is the recent early action in Denmark. So they intervened, not quite as strongly as we're doing actually, at about the same stage in the curve that we may be at. And they had a few days where they had a high number of cases, which you'd expect because we're still discovering new cases from the people that came in from overseas, and then a drop. And then it started to pick up again, and they put in more measures, and it's looking like they might have dropped it again. So it's a slim evidence base and it's a highly uncertain situation. But all the advice from all around the world of anyone that's had experience is to act as early as you possibly can while making it practical. So obviously it's not easy for the government to just shut down the country, and an enormous amount of preparation has been going on in the background so that the government was ready to act on the advice at the right time.
That's the Prime Minister's Chief Science Advisor, Juliet Gerard. It's 23 minutes away from 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National for this lockdown special through until 7 p.m. tonight. Time now to get to the headlines with Susanna.
The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says she doesn't underestimate the enormity of the government raising the COVID-19 alert level. It has been increased to level 3 and will be raised again to level 4 within 48 hours. It means everyone, apart from essential service workers, will be in self-isolation for at least 4 weeks. Ms Ardern says there is a window of opportunity to break the COVID infection chain. She says to ensure the restrictions are not in place for a long period of time, it is vital everyone stick to the rules. People are being reassured they will still receive some form of income during the lockdown. Finance Minister Grant Robertson says the wage subsidy scheme will be expanded with a cap of $150,000 per business removed. He says more details will be unveiled in the coming days. University students are trying to get home before the national lockdown takes effect. Students in Christchurch and Dunedin say the lockdown has prompted panic and uncertainty. Otago University student Lewis Martin says he and his flatmates checked flights as soon as they heard the news. The police commissioner is warning shoppers that officers will intervene if there is any disorder. Supermarkets are begging people to shop normally and stop panic buying. Commissioner Mike Bush says there are various powers available to the police, including legislation under the Health Act and civil defence powers. He says the priority for officers on patrol will be educating people about imminent nationwide restrictions imposed by the government. People are snapping up bread makers and kitchen utensils as more people stay at home. Managing Director of homeware brand Briscoe's, Rod Duke, says the run on bread makers has been happening for a week or two. He encourages people to order online as stores may run out of some products. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna, and thank you for joining us. This is Checkpoint, and I'm Lisa Owen. We are on air until 7 o'clock this evening. It is time now for the business news with Nona Peltier. Nona, wow, this was a big day. So how did the markets react to what was going on?
Well, not very well, to be honest. We had the market, the NZX Top 50 Index, dropped more than 10% at one point earlier today and finished down 7.6%. Now, that is still the lowest level we've been for about 2 years, and it was certainly the biggest drop we've had since 1987. We did have a bigger drop in 1987, but the market was different then. It had a different composition, and then at that point it had dropped 15%. So we didn't get that far down. But look, it's not a good look at all. We saw some dreadful implications here for some companies. Like Tourism Holdings has been hit really hard, and today it was knocked down again 46%. Now keep in mind, this is a
just today.
Now this company, last year its share price was just over $5. Today it's 55 cents. Now consider that this particular company's assets, these are its net tangible assets, so that's its fleet of camper vans and so on. That value, the net tangible asset there per share, is worth $1.83. So it's trading at 55 cents. That's quite
inconceivable.
Almost. And in fact,
but for the fact it is actually happening.
It's actually happening. And the thing is, it does mean that some of these companies, when they recover, and presumably they will, they're going to have to, at some point, perhaps write down the real assets of their the value of their assets in their companies. And so it's the depth of this particular recession is going to be very deep and lasting. From all accounts, it could last a long time. So 4 weeks at home probably is a drop in the bucket compared with what we're going to be facing over the next few months.
I see you've got a list there, Nona, of some of the businesses. Is that some of their dips today?
Yeah, that's just today. So Air New Zealand, we've been talking about them. Yeah. They were down 7.4%, not too bad. Abano Healthcare dropped 30%. Now, they were just in the process of finalizing a takeover offer, and that now looks like it's on the rocks because the company can't function. It can't offer dental services at the moment. So that puts a question mark over whether that takeover will go ahead at the price that it was set at. Sky TV, 28% down. And then there's the big companies. 7.4% down for Auckland Airport, Contact 9.4%, Fletcher Building 11.3%, Meridian, Main Freight, and so on. Ryman Healthcare down 21%, which is a big drop for that company. Sky City down 14.5%.
Let's pause on Sky City for a second, because we were speaking to Sky, the days all merged, but I think it was last week when they said they were preparing for the potential complete shutdown. What do we know about...
so this morning...
They have hotels as well.
Yeah, they do. So this morning they closed down. They announced that they were going to be closing down their Adelaide casino. That's in Adelaide, Australia. That was going to happen this afternoon. This afternoon they came out and they said they're going to be closing, after the announcement from the government here, they'll be closing all their casinos here. Now, they have hotels The hotels are staying open because they have guests in them. And they're awaiting some direction from the New Zealand government as to what happens next.
Yeah.
So for now, of course, they're open. They have guests. They're going to serve those people. And then when those guests move on, there's a question mark. So there are a lot of questions that businesses will be asking. You know, it was interesting just before you were talking about Briscoe Group and the
rush on appliances,
but
to
at the
make
same
bread
time,
and what have you.
they've just suspended their final dividend, and there's a question mark over that because they have to close. They're a non-essential service. What does that really mean? Will people be able to buy online and shop as they normally do? Not too sure, actually. So there's a number of questions we'll be having to ask. Not enough time today to do it all, but there's a lot out there. Interestingly, one of the ones that popped up at the very close, we got a notice from Fisher and Paykel Healthcare. They're the folks that make the respiratory equipment.
Course, yes.
And they've been deemed an essential service, much like our RNZ, I guess. And not just them, but the manufacturers that put into their products. So they're going to continue to manufacture.
And are those are made here in New Zealand? Are they, those pieces of
no, they
equipment?
do their research and development here, though. So they have a very big campus down in Auckland, and they're going to continue to operate there. They have a plant in Mexico as well, where a lot of their manufacturing is done. They do some manufacturing here as well. Now, interestingly, they put out their notice, I'm looking at the time, at 4:56 p.m., just before the market closed. So we were looking down about 8.5%, and then boom, this came out, and we ended
saying
up
that they were an essential service,
so
and
we
they could
came
continue
down.
to operate.
So they were down like just slightly, finished up 2.5%, just like 2.25%, just like that on that one particular announcement. So the market certainly was looking for some good news. Any kind of good news, they certainly are looking for it. So we ended up finishing down 7.6%, which is a long way better than more than 10. We finished down 698 points to 8,499. So that's where we were a couple of years ago. Now, interestingly, the Kiwi is really taking quite a battering, and that's partly because we've had some quantitative easing, which we may have heard of earlier about the Reserve Bank.
$30 billion.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's put more dollars in the system. So of course that has an effect on the value. If you got more of them, they may not be worth quite as much, right? So we are trading at 56.4 US cents. Now I looked back. We haven't been at that level since, I think it was 2009, from what I could tell. 98.1 Australian, so we're still holding pretty firm there, and 48.4 British pence, again, fairly steady. So that was really all I can tell you about the markets, and we're going to have a lot more to say, I'm sure, tomorrow.
Yep, plenty of detail in there. Thank you, Nona Peltier, with our business update. Doctors have been on the phone to thousands of patients since this morning in a radical move away from face-to-face consultations. One Auckland medical centre has done away with its waiting room altogether to combat COVID-19. Phil Pennington reports.
The 5 GPs at Westmere Medical Centre in central Auckland normally see 60 to 70 patients a day, but today that was down by 90%. Dr John Cameron says it's been fascinating witnessing patients adapt so well.
We've basically locked the practice down to people wandering in. We don't have a waiting room anymore. That must be a first for a general practice in Auckland, not to have a waiting room. But it seems to be working really well.
He says triaging over the phone is saving time, taking about 10 minutes for each patient compared to the usual 15-minute face-to-face interview.
They're very aware of the time they're spending on the telephone, whereas if they're sitting next to us, they're not quite so aware. All morning I've had people, look, oh, sorry, I don't want to take up your time. Here's my problem. How can we solve it?
Samantha Merton, whose practice is in central Wellington, says the phones have gone completely mad, but patients seem happy at a move they perceive as keeping them safer.
If patients could be patient, that would be really great.
Dr Merton, who is also president of the Royal New Zealand College of General Practitioners, is staggering the day to cut down on patient-to-patient contact and to reduce the use of protective gear for staff.
We are doing as many flu vaccines as we can in the mornings. We've got a time in the afternoon when we're going to be doing in-person consultations at a time that we have got the gear on, and then late in the afternoons when we're going to do any swabbing that we need to do.
Doctors are hopeful of meeting a target of doing 70% of consultations remotely. But Ben Hudson, in a 3 GP practice in Littleton, stresses that some people must still be seen.
Most of us would want to be examining somebody with acute abdominal pain, for example, someone who's acutely short of breath, various dermatological and ophthalmological conditions. There's quite a few things it would be difficult to manage without seeing someone.
The National Hauora Coalition covers 235,000 patients at 52 general practices from Auckland to Whanganui. Its clinical director, Dr. Rawari McCree-Jansen, says the country going into a full lockdown will not fundamentally change what they're doing.
It creates a small window of opportunity to do everything that we can to prepare so that our transition from level 3 to level 4 is as smooth as possible. Basically, I think we've got most of the infrastructure is what it is, and now we just need to work it really, really well.
He says the fact that 85% of their Māori households have smartphones is helping a lot. The Medical Association says it's about keeping patients, but also doctors and nurses, safe. Its chair, Kate Baddock, a GP in Warkworth, says it's crucial the Health Ministry continues to make personal protective equipment and swabs available to GPs who are on the front line.
To stockpile for when the hospitals are overrun is a futile argument. If it doesn't come out to the practices now so that we can contain it in the community, then the hospitals will be overrun.
The Health Ministry says that at hospitals, many outpatient consultations could be done over the phone. For Checkpoint, Phil Pennington.
The lockdown announcement caused tears and panic for university students who are worried they will be stranded far from home. Thousands of students must find flights or ferry tickets home before the nation goes into lockdown at midnight on Wednesday, or stay in their flats or hostels for the next 4 weeks. Our education correspondent John Gerritsen has been talking to some of them.
Otago University student Jack Newsom says the lockdown announcement prompted a flurry of phone calls home for him and his flatmates.
They're just calling their mums. You know, the phone line's going crazy right now. Can't even call your parents because there's too many people online. We all went to the supermarket just trying to get supplies. It was chaos in there. People getting 5 loaves of bread and stuff. Yeah, we're all just trying to figure out what we want to do.
Jack Newsom is from New Plymouth, and now he has a very short window in which to decide whether he should go home.
It was kind of a bit of panic, I guess, trying to see if I wanted to stay here and be stuck in a dirty old flat for 4 weeks, or if it was worth getting up there. But at this point, I'm thinking staying down here could be wise, because it's going to be kind of the same, just being at home with parents, and it's just be less hassle. But I still got to sort stuff out. I don't know yet.
In the same Dunedin flat, Louis Martin says he's decided to stay rather than return to Wellington, but many people are undecided.
Yeah, everyone's kind of freaking out, to be honest. So no one really knows exactly what's going to happen. Just everyone's sort of stocking up on things. People are just trying to get home if they can, but yeah, it's also based on how scared and worried their parents are about it as well, which kind of affects that.
Aucklander Raiha Hill-Tupo is in her first year at Canterbury University. She was in her room at a university hostel when news of the lockdown came through. She says it took a lot of people by surprise.
You're either one of two. You're either panicking or you haven't realised what's happening, so you're quite relaxed. I feel like I was the latter until about a minute ago.
Another student in the same hostel, Yeshia Govenda, says she can't decide whether to stay or go.
I'm going to have really good care here, and I know that I'm going to be comfortable here. But I also want to be close to my family, and also knowing the conditions of Auckland right now, I feel more comfortable to be home with my parents and my brother. So it's kind of a really difficult decision to make.
Yeshia Govenda says many students are shocked and unsure what to do. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko John Gerritsen tēnei.
It is 8 minutes to 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National for this lockdown special through until 7 p.m. If you are just joining us, the country will go into full lockdown from midnight Wednesday as a proactive, aggressive response to COVID-19. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern said without upgrading to alert level 4 quickly, tens of thousands of New Zealanders could die. From tomorrow, schools will close, and by Wednesday, all businesses, that's restaurants, bars, gyms, will be forced to close too. Supermarkets, pharmacies, medical essential services and gas stations are exempt and will remain open. The lockdown will last for at least 4 weeks. You will have questions and we will try to get answers for you. There have been some issues with the phone lines this afternoon, but you can still text us your questions on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. New Zealanders are snapping up bread makers and kitchen utensils as people prepare to stay at home amid the Covid-19 outbreak. Despite the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern asking people to shop normally, some supermarket shelves have been left empty. Manufacturers are assuring people that the country will have enough supplies and there is no need to panic. Chen Liu reports.
Homeware brand Briscoe's has been one of the hotspots where people go to get prepared for the outbreak. Managing Director at the company, Rod Duke, says the run on bread makers has been going for a week or two.
Our bread maker sales are around about 10 times what they normally are this time of year. We're selling a lot more cooking utensils, pots and pans and non-stick fry pans and baking dishes. It's frantic at the moment.
Mr. Duke encourages people to order online as stores may run out of some products. He says there is already an increase in online orders as people are avoiding going out.
Online sales have accelerated, so it would be true with us that more people are buying online than they perhaps were a month or two ago.
Food manufacturer Goodman Fielder, which owns multiple brands including Vogel's, Freya's and Edmonds, says it's experiencing a significant spike in consumer demand. It also calls for people to shop normally.
We would like to reassure New Zealanders that we are 100% committed to continuing to manufacture. We have increased production in our factories to cope with the demand and have access to the raw ingredients to do so.
The Food and Grocery Council says New Zealand will have enough supplies to get people through. The organisation's chief executive, Catherine Rich, says sales have been up by between 2 and 5 times the norm.
The main message that we continue to share is that people just need to shop normally to prepare for their families, but not to buy more than they need.
Ms. Rich says some firms making toilet paper and food items have increased their production by up to 30 or even 50%.
Certainly, New Zealand has good local production of a wide range of food and grocery products. And of course, the members who import products have upped their orders to bring in product from overseas.
She says the council has set up leadership support for food and beverage companies to offer advice.
Some of our former chief executives and chairmen have volunteered to give their time to support any New Zealand food and beverage company. And also we're inviting any food and beverage companies to join our COVID-19 updates. So you don't have to be a member of the New Zealand Food and Grocery Council. You're welcome to all of our information and support as well.
The government has lifted the alert level for the coronavirus to level 3 immediately and will move to level 4 within 48 hours. People are asked to only visit supermarkets when they need to. Muta horaka o te ahiahi nei ko Chen Liu tēnei.
As the country braces for weeks of severely reduced social contact, community spirit is still shining through. People are leaving the government's community cards in the neighbourhood letterboxes, sharing their contact details and offering a helping hand. Jonathan Mitchell reports.
Not wanting to leave anyone in need, Tom White and his partner are offering assistance to those living nearby with things such as grocery shopping.
We believe in mutual aid, our communities supporting each other, and just at the time we're a little bit worried that, old people in our community who might not have family and stuff, who are self-isolating and, if they need someone to go and get their shopping or whatever.
He lives in a suburb in Lower Hutt and says the crisis is bringing out the best in people.
I think it's brought out the real good side of our community. People really do care about each other, and I think I've seen people reaching out to neighbours and stuff where they might never have before.
In coastal Paikakariki, community volunteer Karen Headland says the locals are keeping an eye on each other more than usual.
We just made sure that every single person in Paikakariki, we know who they are. We've got some way to contact them, even if they're not on internet. So a phone number, their address, and that they know that they are part of a group that's going to look after them for whatever they need.
Karen Headland says they've set up a local support line for people who might be anxious and need a chat.
So people can just have someone who's got some skills dealing with anxiety and who can just have a friendly chat over the phone every day if someone needs.
The Student Volunteer Army has been running errands for people in the Wellington region. Organiser Marlon Drake says they've had hundreds of volunteers lending a hand.
I think it's fair to say that probably like a lot of people are a bit scared. You know, being scared is not so bad when you're doing it together, and that's what we're really trying to send them. That's the message we're trying to send. We're here to ease that burden because it's not just the sort of the Covid-19 ahead, it's also the looming recession.
He says they'll be helping out for as long as they can. In Wellington, for Checkpoint, call Jonathan Mitchell, Tēnei.
If you're just joining us, this is a Checkpoint special. We'll be with you until 7 o'clock this evening. As you may have heard, the country is headed towards total lockdown. That will come into effect at 11:59 on Wednesday night. The Prime Minister has said without these extreme measures, tens of thousands of New Zealanders could die and that she simply could not tolerate that. Schools will close tomorrow and school holidays are being brought forward, but all businesses, so restaurants, bars, gyms, all the businesses that are considered non-essential will have to close on Wednesday. Supermarkets and food providers will be exempt, so stop panic buying. That is the very strong message. The lockdown will last for at least 4 weeks. During that time, the Prime Minister has said she will remain in Wellington. We have moved right now. We are at level alert 3. Now, this is following, importantly, confirmation of community transmission of COVID-19. There are 2 cases where they're contact tracing, where they try and work out where the person got it from, and they're unable to link these 2 cases to travel, which strongly suggests community transmission. The cases, one is in the Wairarapa and one is in Auckland. There were 36 new cases of COVID-19 confirmed in the last 24 hours, so 36 new cases announced today, and that brings the total to 102. So if you were away from home, you were being advised to get home, to travel home within the next 48 hours. Air travel will be limited for essential personnel and freight only after the deadline comes into force. The government is freezing rents to give some people relief and certainty there. And the government has already also announced today an enhanced business support package.
RNZ News at 6. Kia ora, ko Susana Leia tawa tēnei. The Prime Minister says without nationwide self-isolation, tens of thousands of New Zealanders could die from COVID-19. This afternoon, the alert level was raised to level 3 and will be raised to level 4 at 11:59 p.m. on Wednesday. This requires everyone, apart from essential workers, will need to stay home and stop interaction with people outside of those they live with. Self-isolation measures will be in place for a minimum of 4 weeks. Jacinda Ardern says she doesn't underestimate the enormity of what the government is asking, but New Zealand has a window of opportunity to stop the spread of the deadly virus. She says self-isolation will save thousands of lives. A top scientist says without the government's drastic action, the country was on a path to having an outbreak comparative to Italy or the UK. The Prime Minister's chief science advisor, Juliet Gerard, has told Checkpoint the international modelling shows that what had been the worst case scenario for the disease is now the most likely one. She says New Zealand has an opportunity to get COVID-19 under control, but swift action is needed.
All over the world we're seeing that people that don't act early are getting suddenly to the situation where their hospital systems can't cope.
Professor Gerard says the extreme measures give the health system a chance of coping with the pandemic. People are in shock and disbelief at the lockdown announcement. Isabel Raymond was one of 50 people lined up outside the Chauvis New World in Wellington after the announcement. She says she hasn't had time to fully process the sudden changes.
I'm just kind of freaking out. It's all hit at once, like we're getting messages from work, because I also do freelancing as well, so obviously no clients, possibly might not have a job, I don't know. And also like I'm kind of on my own here, I don't have any family here or anything.
Isabel Raymond says she is making an appointment tonight to get a prescription for asthma inhalers. Foodstuffs is urging people to shop normally and not to stockpile as the country prepares for self-isolation. Supermarkets are an essential service and will remain open. A Foodstuffs spokesperson says New World, Pack and Save, Foursquare, Gilmore's and Trent stores will be reducing their hours and extra staff protection measures will be in place. People should use contactless payments like PayWave, not nominate a family member to shop and keep 1.5 metres apart inside stores. A spokesperson says customers must shop normally so there is enough product on the shelves for the elderly when friends and relatives are shopping for them. There are likely to be fresh cases of COVID-19 every day. There are 36 new cases in New Zealand today, bringing the total to 102. The Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says he believes enough people are being tested and there is capacity to do more.
I would expect that we will continue to see more cases each day. And again, we're doing a lot of testing now, between 1,100 and 1,500 tests a day. Our case positivity rate from our testing is just over that. It's between 1% and 2%. Australia's is just under 1%.
Ashley Bloomfield says by comparison, South Korea's testing rate is 3%, the UK is 5% and the US around 13%. The business support package has been expanded significantly, removing the cap for wage subsidies altogether. The package announced last week had a $150,000 cap, which meant only businesses with fewer than 22 employees were covered. Now that the country is heading into full lockdown, the Finance Minister Grant Robertson says there will be no cap.
All businesses, self-employed, contractors and other organisations that I'll outline shortly will be eligible.
Grant Robertson says the cost will rise from $5 billion to $9.3 billion as a result. Work is also underway with the banking sector to ease the financial pressure of rent and mortgage payments. Air New Zealand is increasing its domestic capacity to allow people to return home before the country goes into self-isolation. The airline says it will endeavour to operate its current schedule as planned until at least the end of the week. It's coming up to 4.5 minutes past 6. All rugby in New Zealand has been suspended for an indefinite period. New Zealand Rugby made the announcement after the New Zealand government raised the coronavirus alert status to level 3. All New Zealand teams will cease training, but no decision has been made on the future of Super Rugby or the All Blacks tests scheduled for July. Plans for a revised Super Rugby competition are on hold. The New Zealand Olympic gold medalist Barbara Kendall is glad Tokyo organisers are taking more time to make a call on the Games. The International Olympic Committee is ruling out cancellation because of the global COVID-19 outbreak, but will discuss postponing the July 24th start date, announcing a deadline of 4 weeks to make a decision. The Australian Olympic Committee has told its athletes to prepare for the Games to take place next year, while Canada is calling on the IOC to postpone for 1 year. The only New Zealand woman to have competed in 5 Olympic Games, Kendall won every colour medal in board sailing and is pleased the IOC hasn't made an early decision.
If I was an athlete and I'd qualified for Tokyo, under windsurfing, my sport, I would be really disappointed if they made a too early decision without having, looked at all the options. Because in a year's time, if they postponed it for a year's time, you'd have to go through a whole qualification system again.
Barbara Kendall, that's the news.
This is the latest public health message from the Ministry of Health. The government has announced that effective immediately, New Zealand will be moving to level 3 on the COVID-19 alert system. Physical distancing of 2 metres should be observed when you are outside of your home. The public will continue to have access to essential services such as supermarkets, hospitals and pharmacies when we move to level 4. All educational facilities and early childhood education ECE centres will close, except for a small provision for the children of essential workers. Restrictions will be put in place for travel between regions, apart from people returning to their home or accessing essential services. Additional border measures will be imposed for returning New Zealanders, including the requirement to self-isolate in the city you arrive in. For further information, please visit covid19.govt.nz.
Now the short forecast from Met Service for midnight tomorrow. Northland to Taranaki, including Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Periods of rain today, possible thunderstorms and localised downpours. A few showers tomorrow, mainly in the west. For Gisborne, scattered rain, clearing tomorrow morning. For the remainder of the North Island, showers becoming frequent from the afternoon, that's from the evening, possibly heavy with thunderstorms, especially in the west, then clearing to fine overnight. Nelson and Marlborough, showers about the western ranges, spreading throughout for a time tonight, possibly heavy and thundery. Canterbury and North Otago, brief heavy rain spreading north with a strong cold southerly change, then fine weather. For the remainder of Otago, Southland and Buller to Fiordland, showers, some heavy with small hail tonight. snow above 500 metres in the south. Chatham Islands, periods of rain or drizzle, clearing for a time. You're with RNZ National. It's coming up to 8 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna, and this is Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. We will be with you until 7 o'clock this evening. Countdown is begging people to resume normal shopping behaviour. Panic buying has meant trade has ballooned to volumes equal to Christmas shopping every day for 3 weeks. In a single day last week, Countdown says it sold enough food to feed 10 million people. After repeatedly imploring customers not to hoard groceries, the supermarket giant is still struggling to cope. Its spokesperson, Kitty Hannafin, joins me now. Good evening, Kitty. What's it like out there now?
It's a pretty big day for us, and another big day. Yeah, it's pretty tough going for our team.
Tell me, what is that like? How are they being treated?
Well, there's some beautiful people, of course, but there's some pretty rough treatment of our team going on as well, and I guess that's really distressing for us. They have worked so hard over the last 3 weeks to provide food and groceries for New Zealanders under conditions that are unprecedented for us. I'm so proud of them. They're absolute champions, they're stars, and we're just asking New Zealanders to be kind because we are doing our best. And we'll be here for the marathon. We are one of the only businesses open in the next month, 2 months, 3 months, we don't know. But, be kind.
So
are some mums and dads like you guys.
Yeah, so are some people getting a little irate and a bit huffy about the fact that they can't take more than 2 cans of beans and the like?
I guess, it's very confronting, isn't it, when you go to your supermarket and there's empty shelves and there's stuff that you can't get when you want it. And that's exactly what we've been trying to manage. Like, we're so committed to being fair and decent, and we want to, for people to come to our stores and get what they need when they need it, which is why we ask people not to stockpile and panic buy. And then because no one listened, we had to put limits on so that we could control the demand. And so that, if you, after your shift tonight, needed to go and get some Panadol or some, pasta, that it would be there for you. So, we've tried to deal with the demand through limits, and we've tried to deal with the behaviour through explaining what's going on. And I guess we just keep going back to the very DNA of who we are as Kiwis. Be kind, be decent. We can do this if we all work together. It's really, really simple.
Are you going to have to put any further limits on, do you think?
I hope not. We didn't want to do it in the first place because limits are, kind of terrifying, but our message didn't get through, and, the Prime Minister was trying to help us. Others tried to help to say, you don't need to stockpile, we've got you covered, but it didn't work. So I hope not, because, it's pretty scary to think you can only buy 2, tins of beans. But if we all just buy what we need and shop like we normally do, then we'll have shelves that are full of food and everything will look just like it normally does, and that will give us all a great sense of, ease and peace in a time that is so uncertain. So we can actually make this better, New Zealand, if we take a breath and trust us that we've got you covered. We will look after you. I'm committing to you that we've got you.
Kitty,
we'll do the right thing by you.
Did you give any consideration to, say, rolling closings, like closing one store for one day so you can fully stock it back up again?
Yeah, we have thought about that, and I guess the first step we took was to limit our hours quite significantly last week, which we shifted from 9 to 8 across the country to give our teams a breather and also to allow us more time to replenish our stores and to give the supply chain time every night to pick. So that was what we did last week to see whether we could counter the demand, and I guess going forward we'll just have to see how people respond. But again, I go back to the same message, as if we do what we normally do, then we'll be okay, and we'll have a pretty normal supermarket with food on the shelves if we just shop normally.
So how many shelf stackers would you have working, say, compared to normal times?
Do you know, I actually saw you when I was there, so I was in Countdown in Richmond Road, and I saw our security guards stacking shelves, and I burst into tears because I was like, oh my gosh, so many, and shoppers are stopping to help us stack the shelves. It's quite beautiful. So we've got a lot more at the moment. We are in the business of recruiting. So we're looking for team all over New Zealand to help us meet the demand, to give our team a break, to have more people on the nightfall and more people, online picking, so that we can look after the most vulnerable people. So we've got a lot of team, and we probably need quite a few more.
Do you know how many more? Because that will be a relief to some people whose jobs are very tenuous at the moment. Do you know how many extra positions you may have?
Yeah, well, I think about 2,000 at the moment. But of course, we haven't, we're sort of still modelling up, what it will look like when schools close for our team, of course. We're mums and dads, we have to look after our kids. And if our team get unwell, we've been very clear that we want to, we want our team to take care. We've got about 300 people over 70 who work for us. We've sent them home on full pay until this is over. So that's 300 less people that we worked out we didn't have yesterday. We've got lots of team who are 19,000 who've got, health issues. They are to go home and we'll look after them as well. So I think it's kind of an evolving situation, but we definitely need team, and that's a great thing to offer New Zealanders. We have work for you.
Can you give us a bit of perspective here? When we say people have been stockpiling, what kinds of volumes of food and what particular items are they grabbing for?
We've seen people, trolleys and trolleys, thousands and thousands worth of, dollars worth of product, trays of tomatoes, trays of baked beans, trays of pasta. Phenomenal demand. As you said in your front before I started, $10 million worth of food. We fed 10 million New Zealanders last Thursday. That's not many supply chains can cope with that volume. Phenomenal.
So, what are the trucks filled with? Loo paper?
Yeah. Right, and this is I ask us all to reflect on that. What a waste of space. So our supply chains are very, very automated, and so when the computer reads that we've sold X amount, we're selling 3 times as much toilet paper in a day than we would a week, we automatically replenish the toilet paper. And what a waste of truck space to have toilet paper other than food. So again, it goes to our behaviour. Stop buying toilet paper. Diarrhoea is not a symptom of COVID-19. You do not need to have 5 months worth of supply. It's made in New Zealand. Buy food normally, and our trucks can be full of food. So we're going to overlay that and make that right ourselves. But all of this time is very labour intensive, and we're kind of in full crisis mode trying to respond. So we can fix this with behaviour, and how good is that if we just did the right thing?
So, Kitty, just to be clear, people's, strange shopping patterns is kind of meaning that vital space in trucks, which could be dedicated to actual food that people want and need, is potentially being taken up because you're having to restock these other things that people are buying ridiculous amounts of.
That's exactly right. You're correct.
Okay. Hey, really appreciate you coming on this evening because I know you are flat out, and it's a pleasure to talk to you. All the best. That is Kitty Hannafin, who is from the Countdown supermarket chain, which is doing its best to keep those shelves stocked. And as she said, could you please just go back to normal shopping behaviour so that they do not have to fill their trucks with loo paper? If you are just joining us, the country will go into full lockdown from Wednesday afternoon as a proactive, aggressive response to COVID-19. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, said without upgrading to alert level 4 quickly, tens of thousands of New Zealanders could die. From tomorrow, schools will close, and by Wednesday, all businesses, that's restaurants, bars, gyms, practically every business you can think of, will be forced to close too. Supermarkets, pharmacies, medical services and gas stations are exempt and will remain open, which is another reason for you to shop normally. The lockdown will last for at least 4 weeks, so I'm sure you'll have plenty of questions, and we are trying to get answers for the questions coming in, and we'll get to some of those answers shortly, but keep them coming in the meantime. Phone lines have been ridiculously clogged up this afternoon, so you can text us on 2101, you can tweet us at checkpointrnz, or you can email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is going on 17 minutes after 6. Go hard and go early or risk losing tens of thousands of lives. The Prime Minister says today was the day to step up the nation's response to COVID-19 and to stop it spreading. She said whilst New Zealand was some way behind other countries in terms of the number of cases, the country needed to act quickly to contain it.
We currently have 102 cases, but so did Italy once. Now the virus has overwhelmed their health system, and hundreds of people are dying every day. The situation here is moving at pace, and so must we. We have always said we would act early, decisively, and go hard, and we will. Today, 36 new cases were announced. While the majority of these cases continue to be linked to overseas travel in some way, I can also confirm, as did the Director General of Health, that we have 2 cases where public health officials have been unable to find how they came in contact with COVID-19. On that basis, we now consider there is transmission within our communities. If community transmission takes off in New Zealand, the number of cases will double every 5 days. If that happens unchecked, our health system will be inundated and tens of thousands of New Zealanders will die.
The Prime Minister said now is the time to act, and the only way to reduce the spread of the virus was for people to stay home. She went on to explain what alert level 3 and 4 mean.
Let me set out what this will mean for everyone in practical terms. Supermarkets, doctors, pharmacies, service stations, access to essential banking services will be available throughout New Zealand at every alert level. If you do not have immediate needs, do not go to the supermarket. It will be there for you today, it will be there for you tomorrow, and the day after that. We must give time for supermarkets to restock their shelves. There will be enough for everyone if we shop normally. Stock is not an issue in New Zealand. We will not run out of food. In the meantime, we will be working through practices like those used overseas to make sure that when people are visiting essential services, that we are maintaining social distance at all times. Non-essential businesses in New Zealand must now close. All bars, restaurants, cafes, cinemas, pools, museums, libraries, playgrounds, any other place where the public congregate must close their face-to-face function. Over the next 48 hours, those who provide, for instance, takeaway services must move to close their operations also. All indoor and outdoor events cannot proceed. In short, we are all now preparing as a nation to go into self-isolation in the same way that we have seen many other countries do. Staying at home is essential. It's a simple but highly effective way to constrain the virus. It denies it a place to go and will help give our healthcare system a fighting chance. Over the next 48 hours, every workplace must implement alternative ways of working. People must work from home so that interactions with others are limited. Essential services will need to put in place alternative ways of working that ensure physical distancing of staff of 2 metres or utilise appropriate personal protective equipment.
And she went on to explain all schools will be closed from tomorrow.
Except to the children of essential workers such as doctors, nurses, ambulance drivers, police, and there will be others on that list. This will give them time to plan, but it will be temporary. Schools will close entirely from midnight on Wednesday. The school term will be brought forward. For the remainder of the term, schools will establish ways to teaching online and remotely. All students across the country are currently being given information on this decision for their parents, including the list of who is considered an essential service. This will be communicated directly to parents as well. To be absolutely clear, we are now asking all New Zealanders who are outside essential services to stay at home and to stop all interaction with others outside of those in your household. I understand that self-isolation is a daunting prospect, so we are being practical. You can leave your home for fresh air, a walk, for exercise, to take your children outside, but please remember this simple principle. It must be solitary. We're asking you only spend time with those you are in self-isolation with. And if you are outside, keep your distance from others. That means 2 metres at all times.
And the Prime Minister said travel around New Zealand would also change.
Over the next 48 hours, people will need to go home, be it locally or throughout the country. We have asked all air transport providers to ensure social distancing for that period. After 48 hours, we'll be moving to air travel only applying to the transport of people undertaking essential services and the transport of freight. Public transport will also begin to transition over the next 48 hours and will only be available for those working in essential services, for medical reasons and to move essential goods, including ferry services between the North and South Island. Further details on the transition we are all now making will be made publicly available on the Covid-19 website. Now I want to share with you what will happen while we are all in Alert Level 4 to get ahead of Covid-19. We will continue to vigorously contact trace every single case. Testing will continue at pace to help us understand the current number of cases in New Zealand and where they are based. If we flush out the cases we already have and see transmission slow, we will potentially be able to move areas out of Level 4 over time. But for the next wee while, things will look worse before they look better. In the short term, the number of cases will likely rise because the virus is already in our community. But these new measures can slow the virus down and prevent our health system from being overwhelmed and ultimately save lives. To be successful, though, to stop community transmission, which does have a lag time, these measures will need to be in place for 4 weeks. Again, I want to reiterate to you, you will be able to make regular visits to essential services in that time. Your supermarkets will not close. Your pharmacy and pharmaceutical products will be available. You will be able to access medical services. If we, after those 4 weeks, have been successful, I hope then we will be able to ease these restrictions. If we haven't, we'll find ourselves living with them for longer. That is why sticking to the rules matters. If we don't, if you hang out with your friend at a park or see a family member for lunch, you risk spreading COVID-19 and extending the nation's time in Level 4.
Jacinda Ardern said our low number of cases compared to the rest of the world gives New Zealand a chance, but doesn't mean the country has escaped the threat.
But I wanted to share with you the stark choice that we have faced as government. Medical modelling considered by Cabinet today suggests that without the measures I have just announced, up to tens of thousands of New Zealanders could die from COVID-19. Everything you will all give up for the next few weeks, all of the lost contact with others, all of the isolation and difficult time entertaining children, it will literally save lives, thousands of lives. The worst case scenario is simply intolerable. It would represent the greatest loss of New Zealanders' lives in our history, and I will not take that chance. I would rather make this decision now and save those lives and be in lockdown for a shorter period than delay, see New Zealanders lose loved ones and their contact with each other for an even longer period. I hope that you are all with me on that decision. Together we do have an opportunity to contain the spread and to prevent the worst. I cannot stress enough the need for every New Zealander to follow the advice I've laid out for you today. As a government, we will, and I hope you have seen this, we will do everything in our power to protect you. Now I'm asking you to do everything you can to protect all of us. None of us can do this alone. Your actions will be critical to our collective ability to stop COVID-19. Failure of anyone to play their part in coming days will put the lives of others at risk, and there will be no tolerance for that. We will not hesitate to use our enforcement powers if needed. We are in this together. I'm in no doubt that the measures I've announced today will cause unprecedented economic and social disruption, but they are necessary. I have one final message. Be kind. I know people will want to act as enforcers, and I understand that. People are afraid and they are anxious. But we will play the role of enforcer. What we need from you, our community, is you to support others. Go home tonight and check on your neighbours. Start a phone tree with your street. Plan how you'll keep in touch with one another. We will get through this together, but only if we stick together. So please be strong and be kind.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern there. Meanwhile, the Finance Minister Grant Robertson said lifting the alert level from 2 to 4 means every New Zealand business will be impacted in some way. He said the $150,000 cap on the wage subsidy scheme would be lifted altogether and all businesses would be eligible. He said whilst New Zealanders might not be able to work, it was important they had an income. Mr Robertson said the scheme itself had changed.
Businesses that are less than a year old and firms that have had significant increase in revenue in the past year are now also eligible. They will need to demonstrate revenue loss against a similar time period, for example a 30% loss of income as a result of Covid-19 in March 2020 compared to January 2020. Self-employed people with variable monthly incomes are also now eligible if they can demonstrate the revenue loss against the previous year's monthly average. The scheme also covers registered charities, non-government organisations, incorporated societies and post-settlement governance entities. The expansion of the scheme outlined today takes the estimated cost of the wage subsidy scheme from $5.1 billion to $9.3 billion. The second decision that we have taken today is to freeze rent increases and to look to extend no-cause terminations to protect people during this difficult time. We'll release more details of how we will operationalise that in the coming days. We know that for many New Zealanders, paying the rent is one of the biggest weekly bills they face, and we want to ensure that we ease any pressure on that. And thirdly today, the Government, the Reserve Bank and our retail banks have agreed in principle to a business financing guarantee scheme to help cushion the impact of Covid-19. The scheme would leverage the Crown's balance sheet to enable banks to extend lending to firms which would otherwise be viable. In addition, the Government, the Reserve Bank and our retail banks have also agreed in principle to significant support for mortgage holders. Meetings are taking place as we speak to finalise the details on this, which will also be announced in the coming couple of days. We are also making urgent preparations for further income support for all workers as we move into alert number 4. I want to say directly to employers and employees at this difficult time, please take the time to work through your options. Talk to one another, get in touch with your bank and together make a plan. We will make sure that all New Zealanders continue to receive some form of income through this period. The priority of our government is the health and well-being of our people, and we will do what it takes to keep everybody safe. We are all in this together. He waka e kanoa.
And that's Finance Minister Grant Robertson. And coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, can I go to the beach house if I don't stop on the way? Can I still catch the inter-island ferry after Wednesday's midnight lockdown? And will Ubers still operate? Are dairies allowed to open? Well, we'll answer some of your questions shortly, but first here's Paul Brennan with the headlines.
Thank you, Lisa. The Prime Minister says New Zealand has a window of opportunity to stop the spread of the deadly COVID-19 as the country goes into nationwide self-isolation within the next 2 days. The Nurses Union is calling on people to be kind to health professionals with a growing number of cases. The Air Force and Air New Zealand are on standby to help people move around the country. And the share market has closed at its lowest point in 2 years, with New Zealand's biggest companies falling in value. Those are the headlines.
Thanks, Paul. If you're just joining us, this is a Checkpoint special. We're on air till 7. The government says its decision to shut down the country for at least the next 4 weeks was monumental, but one that was absolutely essential. From tomorrow, all bars, restaurants, cafes, gyms, cinemas, pools, museums, libraries and other public places where people gather have to close. Schools will be mostly closed from tomorrow, except for the children of essential workers like doctors, nurses, ambulance drivers carers and police. But that will only be temporary. Schools and early childhood centres will be closed completely from midnight Wednesday. Education Minister Chris Hipkins says all the evidence says we should act now if we are to avoid the worst case scenario. Mr Hipkins is reiterating the call to stay calm about panic shopping.
This was a monumental decision, a very, very big decision for the country and for the lives that New Zealanders live every day. It's not a decision that the Cabinet took lightly. I think everybody appreciates the gravity of the situation. But actually we've also got to look at how bad it could get if we don't take these measures now when we have the opportunity to try and stamp out COVID-19. We don't want to be in the position that other countries are in where they've got their health systems have been completely overrun and now they're potentially locked down for a lot longer than 4 weeks. So this is a very sensible measure by New Zealand to try and stamp out COVID-19 while we still can.
Did you feel that weight while you were making this decision?
Absolutely. Look, I got the advice late last night. I read it. I then spent most of the night staring out of the window and contemplating that. I think every other minister around the Cabinet table today, and bearing in mind only half of them were there because the other half were dialing in via teleconference. It's part of the new protocol that we've put in place. And in fact, that protocol will only last until today anyway. Ministers are now going to be in self-isolation along with the rest of the country. We'll be working remotely as well. I think all of us felt the gravity of the situation.
So when you say you got this advice last night, give us an idea. I mean, how many pages are you talking and what information was provided to you in order to make this decision?
Look, I think it was a mix of health advice on the justifications for doing this, and the best people to answer questions about that are clearly the Director General of Health, the Minister of Health and the Prime Minister, but also advice on what it would mean, what we would do over the next 48 hours in order to effectively get people home and get people staying home, and of course what all the implications of that are. We've still got to keep critical services going. We've still got to make sure that people are being paid. We've still got to make sure that the supermarkets are open and that people are able to get food. We've still got to make sure that all of the critical infrastructure that keeps the country running. The water's going to flow when the tap turns on. The lights are going to come on when you flick a switch. All of those telecommunication services we rely on will still need to be provided. Banking services will still need to be provided. So it's about making sure that we can continue to do all of those things when the country is shut down as much as possible.
On that note, Minister, the phones have not been working very well this afternoon. Obviously, they're being overloaded by people. What assurances can you give that the essential things are still going to keep ticking over?
Look, a lot of work has gone into that over the last few weeks. We know that as people shift from working at work to working at home, there will be some bumps in the road for that. Obviously, I know the telecommunications companies are working as hard as they can to make sure that that's as smooth as possible. We are asking people for a bit of good faith here, but also I guess the message here around telecommunications, it's the same as around food. Only do what you need to do. Don't panic. There is no need for panic. Just, be sensible.
So what are you most nervous or apprehensive about going into this now?
Look, I think like all New Zealanders, I think that the prospect of being at home and being isolated for an extended period of time is something that everybody will be pausing to think about. And, members of the government, members of parliament, we're no different in that regard. We're also going to be going through this process. We'll be having all of the same emotions as other New Zealanders are. And I think my key message to everybody is, let's stick together, although we're going to be physically apart. You can still communicate with one another. Let's keep talking. Let's keep communicating with one another, and actually, we will get through this. We can make this work. We can recover. We can rebound, and we will.
So, do you think there are some people out there who are simply not getting this, though, and the gravity of the situation?
Look, I think my message to everybody is this is a very serious situation. Everybody needs to take this very seriously. As the Prime Minister outlined today, the alternative is that we could potentially have tens of thousands of deaths in New Zealand. That's not something any New Zealander should be willing to even contemplate. And so these measures are for the well-being of everybody. Everybody needs to play their part.
So how are you going to ensure compliance then?
Look, I think those are questions best directed to Mike Bush, the Commissioner of Police, and others who will be coordinating the enforcement side of this. Obviously, we want people to comply, and we will take action if people are not complying.
What about all those people who don't have a home to go to? That they may be also the impoverished and the hungry. We always know that they are worst off in these kinds of situations, they're hardest hit. What about them?
Look, I know that community organisations, those community services providers, the housing providers are going to be working as hard as they can to make sure that everybody has a place to go. Like I said, this is going to be a bit of a bumpy 48 hours, but I know that people will be pulling out all the stops to make it happen.
In terms of schooling then, when all these kids are at home, and do you envisage that lessons will start up, relatively normal on the internet? Because again, there are lots of families who simply do not have access to that as a tool.
So we know from a number of schools that they have online capability. At the moment they can go online learning relatively easily, and some of them will do that this week. We also know that there are a significant number of kids who won't have easy access to that technology at home, either because they don't have the devices or because the family doesn't have broadband in their house. So we have worked over the last...
Will you make broadband available free of charge to kids who need to be taught from home and who do not have that?
We have been working with the telecommunications companies over the last week or so to make sure that if we get to that point where kids need to be learning from home, that we can supply the technology to make that happen. And that includes the hardware and, of course, the access to broadband.
You mean free, Minister? Do you mean free?
Look, we're going to pull out all the stops to make sure it happens. If we need to make it free, then we will. We're working very hard with the telecommunications companies to do what we can. I know the telecommunications companies already, for example, are taking data caps off, because that was one of the risks for us, that kids would be at home and they'd quickly hit their data caps, and then and that would be a problem. So the telecommunications companies are working incredibly hard with the government to make sure that we can make online learning a possibility as much as possible.
So you're basically assuring us today that if families are not able to afford broadband, it will be made available to them free of charge if necessary.
Look, I can't give you that reassurance at the moment. What I can say is that we're working through all of the options. We're working very hard. We're working very fast. There's a lot of pressure, as you can imagine. There are some physical constraints that we have to work through with the telecommunications companies, including the capacity of some of the networks, particularly in more isolated areas. So we're working really hard to get all of that work done as quickly as possible.
What about those students who are in crucial years at school? They've got vital exams this year. Is that it? Is the year written off?
No, the year's not written off. We're talking about a period of 4 weeks. There are, of course, there's the potential to do things later in the year to help to make up for that time that kids will be away from school at this point in the year. Of course, it's going to depend how much disruption there is after this 4-week period, and at this point we don't know that. We can't give accurate answers on that. So look, it's an evolving situation, and we'll do everything we can to minimise the amount of disruption to kids' education, particularly for those who have exams and who have assessments and whose future really is riding on being able to complete.
What about households where they already have overcrowding and inadequate homes, and they're now going to be stuck in those homes for 4 weeks, potentially more? What's been done for them?
Look, that's a question best directed to the Minister of Housing. Obviously, my focus over the last couple of days has been on getting the education sector as prepared as possible for this to happen, and I know that that's been happening across government. As you can imagine, every minister, every official has been working around the clock to do that, and we haven't all had time to compare notes at this point. So I would really suggest that is we've compared notes but not in detail, so I really would suggest that that's something to direct to the Minister of Housing.
Would you like to speak to the extension of the business package today, Minister?
Look, I think the message to the business community is the same as it was last week. These are exceptional times. The Minister of Finance has announced further measures today to support businesses through this, to support workers through this, to ensure that there is still money coming through the door. He's also been really frank as well. We will not be able to save every job. We will not be able to save every business. We want to soften the blow as much as we can, and that's what the Minister of Finance has that's why he's taken further steps today to extend that business support package.
So what is your message to New Zealanders as they prepare basically to retreat into their homes for at least a month?
My message to New Zealanders is stay calm. This is an exceptional set of circumstances. I understand why people will be taking a moment to pause and to reflect and to wonder what all of this means for them. We're all in this together. We're all going to be staying at home. We're all going to be working from home. We're all going to be having to think about things differently and to do things differently than we have in the past. People need to stay calm. There's no need to go out and panic buy. Our food supply chains will stay open. Supermarkets will be staying open. We'll be making sure that happens. People will still have the opportunity to go shopping and to pick up the essentials. They don't need to go and buy a whole month's worth of groceries all tonight in a rush. If people are sensible and they buy what they need for the next day or two, there will be enough for everybody. The supermarkets will have time to restock their shelves. That's one of the really critical messages. Please don't go out there and buy more than you need in the short term, because that will mean that somebody else who needs something in the short term won't be able to get it. You will be able to keep shopping at the supermarket. You will be able to keep up with that as we go through this next 4 weeks.
And that's Education Minister Chris Hipkins. It is 17 minutes to 7. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National for this lockdown special, and we'll be with you until 7 this evening. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern said without upgrading to alert level 4 quickly, tens of thousands of New Zealanders could die. From tomorrow, schools will close, and by Wednesday at midnight, all businesses, restaurants, bars, gyms, you name it, they will have to close too. Supermarkets, pharmacies, medical services and gas stations are exempt and will remain open. And the lockdown will last for at least 4 weeks. Now, a lot of you have been sending us questions, so right now we're going to try and answer them for you. Our reporter, Nita Blake-Person, has joined me in the studio. Before we hit the list, Nita, where have the answers come from? Where have we sourced this material from?
So some of them are direct from the Prime Minister's office and some of them are from official government websites. We've kind of had to scramble to pull them all together. This is very much a moving situation, so different information is being uploaded at different times, but all official sources. This is the official guidance.
And including the Prime Minister's office. OK, let's get to the first question. This one says, hey RNZ, you mentioned that citizens residents flying home must now self-isolate in the city they land in. Most flights are coming into Auckland, including that of a family member who gets home tomorrow night. Does this self-isolation rule come into effect immediately? E.g., my family member will need to isolate in Auckland, they're asking.
Right, so this answer does come directly from the Prime Minister's office, and they say if you are arriving in New Zealand now, you need to get straight to where you are self-isolating, preferably in a private car. If people have to fly from Auckland to other parts of the country, they will have until 11:59 on Wednesday night to do so when that level 4 kicks in. Physical distancing will be required on the domestic flight, and further policy advice on this is still being developed and will be considered tomorrow, so there's likely to be further directives, but the aim is for everyone to self-isolate where they land.
OK, so if you get in before the deadline, you need to get where you're going by the deadline. Got it. Will New Zealand Post keep delivering mail? Will StudyLink keep paying student allowance and accommodation payments, even if students have returned home while campuses are closed, but they still have to pay rent, etc. on their flat?
Right, so two parts, New Zealand Post and Essential Service. They're keeping going along with courier drivers. The second part regarding StudyLink. So on StudyLink's website, the latest they have is the following, direct quote, you will continue to be paid if your provider can't deliver your course on campus or from home temporarily, but you do expect to return to study in the near future. So obviously we are in unprecedented times at the moment. Who knows how long temporarily is at this stage, but the implication I can see is that StudyLink payments will continue to be made.
Okay. The next person says, is there anything about dairy staying open? Are they meant to shut for the 4-week period too?
I have been trying to find clarity on this. Supermarkets are an absolute yes as food and beverage production. We have been stressing that as much as possible. They will continue. So a dairy, I guess it kind of depends. You know, the sizes vary and the size of the community they service varies. So I would say likely yes, if they are providing food to small communities, they will keep going.
A lot of people are interested in this next question because some people don't drive themselves and if they need to get to the supermarket, doctor, etc. So the question is, can taxi and rideshare drivers work after the lockdown?
Good news for those people. Taxi drivers and rideshare services are considered essential services and they're going to continue.
Okay. You've already answered this one about post. Someone else was asking about that. So definitely postal services. What about if I order something online and it's delivered by a courier?
My understanding is that courier drivers are keeping going as well. Things are going to be busy. They're going to be flat out, one would imagine, but they're still going. So those deliveries should keep coming.
And the next one, very practical question. What about rubbish and recycling collection?
Considered an essential service, rubbish and recycling will continue throughout the lockdown.
And we've heard a lot about medical services. You'll still be able to go to your doctor, etc. But what about your pets if they need so-called medical attention?
They are an essential service, so vets should be considering. Like many services, there may be, changes to hours or things like that, ways they go about it. But vets are an essential service and should keep going through the lockdown.
Next person says, my wife is stuck in Nelson with her car. Her home and family is in Wellington, but there are no tickets on the ferry for the next 5 or 6 days. Will they let her travel to Wellington next week if that is the first date that she can get a ferry ticket?
So this answer also comes directly from the Prime Minister's office. We have to limit contact immediately. Unfortunately, that means people who cannot get home in the next 48 hours will need to self-isolate where they are. This person should consider getting on a plane and flying back to Wellington if they can.
So the advice there is leave your car if that is an option, get on the plane, get back to Wellington, because the short answer is once the deadline comes in,
Stay put. You are where you are, correct.
Okay, next one. In level 4, are we able to pack up from home and drive to the beach house for a change of scene? Or do we need to head there tomorrow and stay there for the full 4 weeks?
Yeah, so this one also from the Prime Minister's office, but kind of interesting in context of the last one. And I guess all of it comes down to how many people you're going to be exposed to and how you're going to be moving. So they say, yes, people can go for a drive, but they should only do so with others that they are in isolation with, and they should maintain 2 metres distance from others when they get to their destination and not meet or congregate in public spaces. So people can get fresh air and a change of scene, but any breach of these rules will mean we have to stay in lockdown for longer and our chance to beat the virus will be lost. So that's a pretty strong message to do as you're told.
And I think we should pause and make the distinction here. The distinction being the person who's talking about going to the beach house is going with their own family in their own car, zero contact with anyone else, arriving on site and remaining in that property on site with no contact from other people. The difference between that and the other case we just mentioned is the woman would be getting on a ferry with a bunch of other folk.
Absolutely, a lot more chance, risk of spreading.
Now, this one says, I have a friend who's a gardener and she is wondering if she will still be able to work as she works alone and rarely sees anyone. She lives in a house with 2 other people. Should she stop working?
At level 4, this answer from the Prime Minister's office, at level 4, only essential services may continue, so this person will be required to stay at home. They will only be able to get a wage subsidy if they are a business or a sole trader. So there's the economic impact, but also just the practical impact that that person, like everyone else who's not deemed an essential service, needs to stay at home.
Thank you for that. That is Nita Blake-Person going through a list of your questions there. Hopefully we got to some of the main ones, but keep them coming because this thing is not going away and we'll attempt to address them either today or over future shows. The support package to assist businesses affected by the fallout from COVID-19 has been expanded significantly, removing the cap for wage subsidies altogether. The scheme announced last week had a $150,000 cap, which meant only businesses with fewer than 22 employees were covered. The cost will now go from $5 billion to $9.3 billion as a result. There is also work going on with the banking sector to ease the financial pressure of rent and mortgage payments. And Finance Minister Grant Robertson says there will be further measures to support New Zealanders financially. Andrew McRae has been monitoring business reaction.
The local share market has slumped to its lowest point in nearly 2 years, and the New Zealand dollar is sharply weaker as authorities step up measures to counter the effects of the COVID-19 virus. Every stock on the top 50 index has fallen, with tourism, travel and hospitality businesses showing some of the biggest drops. The Reserve Bank moved earlier today to buy back up to $30 billion worth of government bonds to further boost the economy. Chief economist at the ANZ, Sharon Zollner, says the scale of it was a surprise.
We were thinking 15 to 20 or maybe a bit more, so it's definitely at the upper end of what anyone was expecting.
The bond buyback effectively puts money into the economy. Sharon Zollner says the return on investments in bonds has been increasing over the last few weeks. She says now the Reserve Bank will absorb the extra bonds, things are changing.
We've actually seen the 10-year yield drop 0.5%, and the dollar dropped as well, which is also a really useful easing in monetary conditions. So essentially, bond yields should be falling because the Reserve Bank has cut the official cash rate as low as they can. But it's just the fact that the government are needing to borrow so much. That's why you need this coordination between monetary and fiscal policies.
The extension of wage subsidies has pleased the CEO of Business New Zealand, Kirk Hope, who was pushing for them to be extended.
So there's really three parameters to it. So there's supporting people's incomes, enabling the businesses to continue to be alive while dormant, because again, there will be demand after we get through what is a pretty significant health and economic shock.
But he has a stark prediction of upcoming job losses.
Well, between 60 and 100,000. And the reason, so one of the things that has been challenging with this virus is that some industries have been impacted actually for quite a considerable time.
He cites the tourism industry as the one that started to feel the effects of a decline in visitors back in January. But there was further pain in that sector today. Flight Centre has made 250 of its staff redundant and closed over 30 shops. Its managing director, David Coombs, says international travel is their core business, so they were forced to take immediate and drastic action.
We've done everything we can to hold this off, and we've been eagerly waiting to hear from the government what they will be able to do to assist big business, but at the moment there isn't anything out there to assist.
David Coombs says he intends to keep Flight Centre running so they can re-employ staff when travel restrictions lift. Michael Barnett from the Auckland Chamber of Commerce suggests the wage subsidy will be better provided directly to the worker, bypassing the business.
The government can also be looking at taxes, so provisional tax for business, based on future income, not on past. That's going to offer some relief for them. Business owner mortgages, that's not necessarily a government issue. It's going to be an issue for banks, so that's a good communication.
Michael Barnett says the big issue for all businesses is diminishing income. For Checkpoint, Ko Andrew McRae-Tene.
The country is preparing for the first day of nationwide self-isolation tomorrow. Workers are setting up home offices. Parents are gathering homeschooling resources to get ready for battening down. Many have already been working from home to try and contain the spread of the coronavirus. Amy Williams filed this report.
About 10% of the working population was estimated to be working from home today, when news hit that tomorrow it would be almost everyone. One Auckland parent, Joe Jackson, is already working from home, and his children's school has provided online learning tools.
My two are at the age, they're 11 and 10, so they're quite self-sufficient. And they know how to log in online, they know how to manage their learning. I just check in with them and see how they're going.
Many have bought supplies ahead of today's announcement. Stationery and office supplies company, Office Max's New Zealand Managing Director Kevin O'Byrne, says office supplies have been in high demand for weeks.
We've seen, base products like paper and printers and ink and toner supplies increasing by about 90% over the last month, but also some technology items. And so things like webcams were about 406%, I think the number is up at the moment.
Mr O'Byrne says he's waiting to find out if his business is classed as an essential business.
We've certainly had some discussions with MB over the last few days about being an enabler for school-type products to be available to school kids and preschool. And so we're unclear at this time whether we will in fact be considered to be an essential service.
The Public Service Association has 76,000 members across 5 sectors. Its National Secretary, Glenn Barclay, says he's concerned for those who may lose their jobs.
We're concerned about those members who may be working as contractors or for labour hire companies. There is a significant group of people employed in the public service and labour hire, for example, and their future will be uncertain.
Auckland City Business Association, Heart of the City, monitors activity including foot traffic. Its Chief Executive, Viv Beck, says the city centre has changed significantly since last Monday, when some businesses started to work from home.
It's so unusual to see places that are usually thriving, just sort of so quiet. So it is a very unusual feeling.
Ms Beck says businesses needing information about government assistance can contact Heart of the City.
It's pretty devastating for people to just see their livelihoods under such sudden threat. We've just been endeavouring to communicate with people and make sure they've got access to the help that they need.
For those who can work from home, PSA National Secretary Glenn Barclay says it could be an opportunity to do work that's been put to the back of the list, but acknowledges working from home can be difficult.
We want employers to be reasonable about this because not every home environment is a good place to work or an easy place to work. The ability of someone to both work and look after children in the home is going to be a challenge.
A personal workspace and behaviour expert, Bart de Vries, says it'll be important to keep a routine when working at home. He says it'll be a big challenge for people to maintain productivity, being in a different environment and facing such exceptional circumstances. For Checkpoint, Amy Williams.
The National Party has given a full-throated endorsement of the government's move to impose a 4-week lockdown across the country. Earlier in the day, the opposition called for the alert level to be raised to 4 and directed its MPs and candidates to put their campaigning on hold. Here's Nationals leader Simon Bridges.
Well, good afternoon. New Zealand is in an unprecedented crisis where lives and livelihoods are at stake. National supports the government's decision to move the country towards level 4 of the Covid-19 alert system over the next 48 hours to protect New Zealanders' health and to extend the economic package for all businesses. I understand that this will be a worrying and stressful time for New Zealanders. I encourage everyone to stay calm and follow the rules that are now in place from the Prime Minister, from government, from officials and from essential services. I have offered the government the services of our members of Parliament and staff to assist where we can. And of course, we will continue as members of Parliament to play an important role to ensure the best decisions are made in the interests of all New Zealanders.
And that's National Party leader Simon Bridges there. Just before we go, a note from the Blood Service. Blood donation is considered an essential service. Travelling to a donor centre is considered essential travel. So they're asking people to make appointments and keep donating blood at this time. Thank you for joining us on this absolutely extraordinary day. We will be in lockdown from midnight on Wednesday. Our news teams will keep you up to date. Morning Report is back tomorrow morning, and we'll see you tomorrow.
RNZ News at 7. Good evening, I'm Susana Leatawa. The Police Commissioner is warning shoppers that officers will intervene if there's any disorder. The Prime Minister says everyone will now have to go into self-isolation to stem the transmission of COVID-19. Supermarkets are begging people to shop normally and stop panic buying. At a news conference this afternoon, Mike Bush says there are various powers available to the police, including legislation under the Health Act and civil defence powers.
There's also powers under the Summary Offences Act if people are doing things they shouldn't do. Your question around supermarkets, if people are being disrespectful, if it goes to another level, we will intervene to keep those places safe and to maintain order.
Mike Bush says the priority for officers on patrol will be educating people about imminent nationwide restrictions imposed by the government. The Director